The ancient sands of Egypt hold secrets that have captivated humanity for millennia, whispering stories of pharaohs and pyramids, of gods walking among mortals, and of a civilization so magnificent that its echoes still resonate through our modern world. Tonight, as you settle into the gentle embrace of sleep, let me take you on a journey through time, back to the banks of the mighty Nile, where one of history's greatest civilizations first drew breath from the fertile black soil and reached toward the stars with monuments that still defy explanation. Picture yourself floating above the vast expanse of northeastern Africa, where the life-giving waters of the Nile carve their eternal path through endless desert. This is where our story begins, not with the sudden appearance of a great empire, but with the slow, patient work of countless generations who transformed a harsh landscape into the foundation of human achievement. The ancient Egyptians themselves understood this profound connection to their land, calling their world Kemet, the Black Land, where the rich, dark sediment deposited by the annual floods created an oasis of abundance in the midst of the unforgiving Sahara. As we drift back through the mists of time, we encounter the earliest inhabitants of this remarkable region, hunter-gatherers who followed the rhythm of the seasons along the river's edge. Around 10,000 years before the birth of Christ, these nomadic peoples began to discover something extraordinary. The Nile, unlike any other river in the world, flooded with perfect regularity each year, depositing layers of nutrient-rich silt across its banks and creating natural farmland that seemed almost magical in its fertility. This wasn't mere chance or luck, but the result of distant rains falling in the Ethiopian highlands. A connection these early peoples could never have understood yet came to depend upon with their very lives. The transformation from wandering tribes to settled communities didn't happen overnight. For thousands of years, small groups experimented with agriculture, learning to predict the Nile's moods and harness its power. By 6,000 years before Christ, a remarkable shift had occurred. The pastoral lands surrounding the Nile began to dry out, the Great Sahara Desert expanding its dominion and forcing the scattered tribes to migrate closer to the river's protective embrace. This wasn't a catastrophe, but rather the forge in which Egyptian civilization would be shaped, as diverse peoples brought their skills, beliefs, and innovations together along the narrow green corridor that would become their eternal home. During these formative centuries, something extraordinary was taking place in the minds and hands of these early Egyptians. They were developing one of humanity's greatest achievements, a system of writing that would preserve their thoughts, dreams, and accomplishments for millennia to come. The earliest hieroglyphic inscriptions appeared on pottery vessels around 3200 BC, marking the moment when human consciousness began to leave permanent traces of its existence. These weren't mere scratches in clay, but the birth of recorded history itself, the first tentative steps toward capturing the infinite complexity of human experience in symbols that could speak across the vast gulf of time. The communities that emerged during this pre-dynastic period were developing the cultural foundations that would eventually coalesce into one of history's most enduring civilizations. The Badarian culture in Upper Egypt showed remarkable sophistication in their burial practices and pottery, while the Naqada cultures that followed demonstrated increasing social complexity and artistic achievement. Meanwhile, in Lower Egypt near the Mediterranean coast, different communities were pursuing their own path of development, creating a rich tapestry of cultural diversity that would eventually be woven together into a unified whole. Trade networks began to spread like veins through the ancient world, carrying not just goods but ideas, technologies, and dreams. And cedar wood from Lebanon, precious stones from distant mountains, and exotic materials from lands beyond the horizon flowed into Egypt, while Egyptian innovations and artistic styles traveled outward, creating connections that spanned continents. These weren't merely commercial transactions, but the threads from which the fabric of ancient civilization was being woven. As we approach the dawn of recorded history, we witness one of the most pivotal moments in human development. Around 3150 BC, a figure emerged from the mists of legend and history, a king whose name would echo through eternity. The ancient Egyptians called him Mene, though history remembers him as Menes, the great unifier who forged the scattered kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt into a single mighty realm. Some scholars believe this legendary figure may have been King Nama, whose ceremonial palette depicts the symbolic unification of the two lands in intricate detail. This wasn't merely a political conquest, but the birth of a revolutionary concept that would define Egyptian civilization for 3,000 years. The idea that a single individual could embody divine authority and maintain cosmic order by ruling over both the fertile Nile Valley and the harsh desert regions as complementary parts of a sacred whole. The pharaoh wasn't just a king, but the earthly manifestation of the gods themselves, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order that kept the forces of chaos at bay. The establishment of Memphis as the new capital marked the beginning of the pharaonic system that would endure longer than any other form of government in human history. From this strategic location where Upper and Lower Egypt met, the early pharaohs could control the vital agricultural resources and organize the massive labor forces that would soon create wonders that still astound us today. The development of hieratic script, a cursive form of hieroglyphic writing, enabled the administration of this vast unified kingdom and the recording of royal achievements, religious texts, and administrative records with unprecedented efficiency. During these foundational centuries of the early dynastic period, the essential elements of Egyptian civilization crystallized into forms that would endure for millennia. The practice of mummification began to develop, reflecting profound beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the continuation of existence beyond the physical world. These weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated theological concepts that would influence human understanding of mortality and transcendence for thousands of years. The early dynasties established templates for pharaonic rule that emphasized the divine nature of kingship, the importance of monumental architecture, and the central role of religious ritual in maintaining cosmic order. Trade networks expanded dramatically during this period, with Egyptian merchants venturing to distant lands in search of precious materials and exotic goods. By the Second Dynasty, regular trade with Byblos provided access to high-quality timber that Egypt's own landscape couldn't supply, while expeditions to Nubia brought gold, ivory, and exotic animals that would become symbols of pharaonic power and divine favor. As we enter the Old Kingdom period around 2700 BC, we witness the emergence of what would become known as the Age of Pyramids, when Egyptian civilization reached its first sustained peak of achievement. This wasn't merely about building impressive monuments, but about organizing human society on a scale that had never been attempted before. The capital remained at Memphis, from where the pharaohs commanded resources and labor forces that enabled them to create structures that would outlast empires and inspire wonder for millennia to come. The transformation of formerly independent regions into nomes under royal control represented a revolutionary approach to governance that centralized authority while maintaining local administration. Former rulers became governors and tax collectors, creating a hierarchical system that could efficiently manage vast territories and complex projects. The Egyptians of this era believed their king to be the living incarnation of Horus, creating a direct link between the human and spiritual worlds that justified absolute royal authority and enabled unprecedented social coordination. The Old Kingdom worldview held that the universe worked in cycles, with the pharaoh serving as the crucial force maintaining the stability of these eternal patterns. This wasn't merely political propaganda, but a genuine belief system that enabled Egyptian civilization to achieve levels of organization and accomplishment that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. The Egyptians perceived themselves as a specially chosen people, blessed by the gods with the greatest river in the world and charged with maintaining cosmic order through their pharaoh's divine authority. The story of pyramid construction begins with the revolutionary architectural innovations of King Snefru, whose reign marked the transition from earlier step pyramids to the true, smooth-sided pyramids that would become Egypt's most iconic monuments. At Meidum, engineers experimented with filling in a step pyramid and covering it with limestone casing, while the bent pyramid at Dashur represented the first attempt to build a true smooth-sided pyramid from the ground up. Though partially successful, the bent pyramid's unique appearance resulted from structural challenges that forced builders to reduce the angle of construction partway through the project. Several kilometers north of the bent pyramid stands Snefru's greatest achievement, the Red Pyramid, the world's first successfully completed smooth-sided pyramid. This monument represented not just architectural triumph, but the culmination of generations of experimentation, learning, and innovation. The precision required for such construction demanded advances in mathematics, engineering, and project management that would influence human civilization for millennia to come. Snefru's son Khufu would inherit not only the throne, but also the accumulated wisdom of these architectural experiments, applying them to create what would become the most famous monument in human history. The Great Pyramid at Giza emerged from this foundation of knowledge and innovation, its massive form rising from the desert plateau like a geometric mountain crafted by divine hands. Imagine standing before this colossus in its original glory, its smooth limestone casing gleaming white in the desert sun, its apex crowned with a golden capstone that caught the first rays of dawn and the last light of dusk. The statistics of this monument speak to achievements that strain modern comprehension. Its base covered more than 13 acres of carefully leveled bedrock, with sides that rose at precisely 51 degrees and 52 minutes, reaching an original height of over 480 feet. The limestone blocks that formed its core averaged more than 2 tons each, with some of the largest granite stones weighing 15 tons or more. Yet these massive elements were fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot slip between many of the joints, achieving a level of accuracy that rivals modern construction techniques employing laser guidance systems. The precision extends beyond individual stone placement to the monument's overall design and orientation. The entire 13-acre base was leveled to within a fraction of an inch, a feat of engineering that demonstrates mathematical and surveying capabilities that scholars once thought impossible for ancient peoples. The pyramid's sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, while its internal chambers and passages reflect astronomical knowledge that connected earthly architecture with celestial movements in ways that still inspire wonder and speculation. As you drift deeper into sleep, envision the vast organization required to create such a monument. This wasn't the work of enslaved masses driven by whips and fear, as popular imagination might suggest, but rather a carefully coordinated effort involving thousands of skilled workers, craftsmen, and laborers who took pride in their contribution to eternal glory. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the workers' villages near the pyramid sites, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities that cared for those who devoted their lives to these sacred projects. The workforce included permanent crews of master masons and specialized craftsmen who worked year-round, supplemented by seasonal laborers who arrived during the annual flood when agricultural work was impossible. These weren't foreign slaves, but Egyptian farmers and workers who viewed pyramid construction as both religious duty and practical employment. Marks found on individual stones record the names of work gangs with designations like craftsman gang and vigorous gang, suggesting a spirit of competition and pride that motivated extraordinary achievement. The logistics of pyramid construction required innovations that influenced human civilization far beyond their immediate purpose. The transportation of millions of stone blocks from quarries to construction sites demanded sophisticated understanding of leverage, ramps, and rolling techniques. Most stones came from local quarries on the Giza plateau itself, but the finest limestone casing stones traveled from Tura across the Nile, while granite for internal chambers journeyed hundreds of miles from Aswan in the south. Ancient records describe how workers loaded massive stones onto wooden boats and transported them along the Nile during flood season, when higher water levels allowed navigation closer to construction sites. An extensive canal system, now vanished beneath centuries of sand and development, connected the river to the pyramid complex, enabling the delivery of materials on a scale that wouldn't be matched until the industrial age. Recent geological studies have mapped the course of an extinct Nile branch that once flowed much closer to the pyramids, solving long-standing mysteries about how ancient engineers moved such enormous quantities of stone across seemingly impossible distances. The pyramid complex extended far beyond the monuments themselves, encompassing temples, causeways, boat pits, and subsidiary pyramids that created sacred landscapes designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful transformation into a god. The mortuary temple, connected to the pyramid's eastern face, provided a setting for daily rituals that maintained the deceased king's divine status, while the valley temple at the edge of the cultivation served as a gateway between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. Khafra's pyramid, built by Khufu's son, stands as a testament to the continuing ambition and capability of the 4th dynasty rulers. Though slightly smaller than his father's monument, Khafra's pyramid appears taller due to its position on elevated ground and the steeper angle of its sides. The complex includes the mysterious Great Sphinx, carved from a natural limestone outcrop into the form of a lion with a human head, creating the largest statue of the ancient world. The Sphinx measures 240 feet in length and 66 feet in height, its enigmatic gaze fixed eternally toward the eastern horizon where the sun rises each day. For thousands of years, this colossal guardian was buried up to its neck in desert sand, its head emerging from the dunes like a dream-made stone. Ancient visitors to Egypt marveled at this mysterious visage, spinning legends about its origin and purpose that have echoed through history. The third pyramid, at Giza, built by Menkaure, demonstrates how even reduced resources could create monuments of lasting beauty and significance. Though less than half the height of the Great Pyramid, Menkaure's tomb complex includes elaborate temples, 3 subsidiary queens' pyramids, and internal chambers decorated with unique architectural elements found nowhere else at Giza. The granite casing of its lower courses and the vaulted ceiling of the burial chamber reveal continuing innovations in construction and design. The entire Giza complex represents one of humanity's greatest organizational achievements, constructed over approximately a century during the reigns of 5 pharaohs. Beyond the 3 main pyramids, the plateau includes the Great Sphinx, valley and mortuary temples, 35 boat pits carved from solid bedrock, multiple causeways, and extensive paving of the entire area with massive stone blocks. This comprehensive sacred landscape transformed the natural desert plateau into a cosmic diagram that connected earthly architecture with celestial patterns and divine purpose. The cultural and economic foundations supporting such monumental construction extended throughout Egyptian society and beyond. Trade networks reached from the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa, bringing gold, aromatic resins, ebony, ivory, and exotic animals from the mysterious land of Punt. Egyptian expeditions ventured to Anatolia for tin and copper essential for bronze production, while merchants traveled to Afghanistan for lapis lazuli, the precious blue stone beloved by Egyptian craftsmen. These extensive commercial relationships weren't merely economic transactions, but cultural exchanges that enriched Egyptian civilization and spread Egyptian influence throughout the ancient world. Cedar wood from Lebanon enabled the construction of sacred boats and fine furniture, while olive oil from Crete and Greece supplemented domestic production. The wealth flowing into Egypt from these diverse sources funded not only pyramid construction, but also the artistic and intellectual achievements that made the Old Kingdom a golden age of human civilization. The artistic conventions established during the Old Kingdom would influence Egyptian culture for 3 millennia. creating a visual language of extraordinary consistency and power. The principles of frontality, composite composition, and hierarchical scale weren't arbitrary artistic choices, but reflected profound theological concepts and divine presence about the nature of representation. Egyptian artists weren't trying to create realistic portraits, but rather eternal forms that could serve as vessels for spiritual essence. The guidelines and grid systems developed during this period ensured that artistic representations remained recognizable and effective across centuries of cultural change. Each statue, relief, and painting was designed to function as a place of manifestation, where divine or human spirits could take residence and interact with the living world. This wasn't primitive thinking, but sophisticated understanding of art's spiritual and social functions that enabled Egyptian civilization to maintain cultural continuity across vast spans of time. As the Old Kingdom reached its zenith, the pharaohs commanded resources and reverence that elevated them to near-divine status in the eyes of their subjects. The pyramid texts, first inscribed on the walls of King Unis's pyramid chambers, preserve some of humanity's earliest religious literature, revealing beliefs about death, resurrection, and eternal life that would influence religious thought for millennia. These sacred writings weren't mere funeral inscriptions, but comprehensive guides to the afterlife that mapped the soul's journey through cosmic realms beyond death. The reign of Pepi II, the second king of the 6th dynasty, marked both the culmination and the beginning of the end of Old Kingdom grandeur. This remarkable pharaoh ascended to the throne as a young boy and ruled for 94 years, witnessing the gradual transformation of Egyptian society from the heights of pyramid-building glory to the challenges that would eventually fragment the unified kingdom. Imagine the weight of such longevity, watching generations of subjects live their entire lives under a single ruler whose reign spanned nearly a century of human experience. As Pepi II's extraordinarily long reign progressed, subtle but profound changes began to reshape the very foundations of Egyptian society. The pharaoh's quasi-divine status, once absolute and unquestioned, began to diminish as powerful regional governors, the nomarchs, accumulated wealth and authority that rivaled royal power. These administrators, who had once served at the pharaoh's pleasure, gradually transformed their positions from temporary appointments into hereditary offices, creating local dynasties that operated with increasing independence from central authority. The magnificent pyramids continued to rise during the 5th and 6th dynasties, but perceptive observers might have noticed subtle signs of decline in their construction. The general quality and scale of these monuments decreased over time, reflecting not just reduced resources, but also the gradual dispersal of centralized power that had once enabled such massive undertakings. The pharaohs still commanded respect and tribute, but their ability to mobilize entire populations for monumental projects was slowly eroding as regional leaders diverted resources to their own territories and ambitions. By approximately 2200 BC, the carefully maintained balance that had sustained Egyptian civilization for over 500 years finally collapsed. The unified government that had ruled from Memphis since the earliest dynasties fractured, leaving Upper and Lower Egypt under different rulers who competed for legitimacy and control. And this wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but rather the culmination of gradual changes that had been building for generations, like cracks in a mighty dam that eventually give way to overwhelming pressure. The period that followed, known to historians as the First Intermediate Period, would test the resilience of Egyptian civilization in ways that its founders could never have imagined. For over a century, the land that had once stood united under divine kingship experienced political fragmentation, economic disruption, and social upheaval that challenged everything Egyptians believed about cosmic order and royal authority. Yet even in these dark times, the cultural foundations laid during the Old Kingdom proved remarkably durable, preserving essential elements of Egyptian identity that would eventually enable reunification and renewal. Around 2055 BC, a new figure emerged from the southern city of Thebes, a place that had remained relatively stable during the chaos of the first intermediate period. Mentuhotep II, whose name means Montu is satisfied, began the patient work of reunifying Egypt under a new dynasty that would usher in what historians call the Middle Kingdom. This wasn't merely a political restoration, but a cultural renaissance that would see Egyptian civilization reach new heights of artistic, literary, and intellectual achievement. The reunification process required not just military conquest, but also the delicate work of rebuilding trust, re-establishing trade networks, and creating new administrative systems that could prevent future fragmentation. Mentuhotep and his successors understood that lasting unity required more than force. It demanded a renewed sense of shared identity and common purpose that could bind together the diverse regions of Egypt under a single crown. The Middle Kingdom, spanning from approximately 2040 to 1782 BC, represented a fundamental shift in Egyptian civilization. Where the Old Kingdom had been characterized by the absolute authority of god-kings who commanded pyramid construction through divine mandate, the Middle Kingdom developed more nuanced approaches to governance that recognized regional diversity while maintaining central authority. This wasn't weakness, but wisdom, creating flexible systems that could adapt to changing circumstances while preserving essential unity. Later, Egyptians would remember the Middle Kingdom as their golden age, a time when literature, art, and philosophical thought reached unprecedented levels of sophistication. The stories composed during this period, including the tale of the shipwrecked sailor and the story of Sinuhe, became classics that were copied and studied for centuries afterward. These weren't merely entertainment, but profound explorations of human nature, destiny, and the relationship between individuals and the divine order that governed their lives. The democratization of afterlife beliefs during the Middle Kingdom marked another revolutionary development in Egyptian civilization. Where Old Kingdom mortuary practices had focused primarily on ensuring the pharaoh's successful transformation into a god, Middle Kingdom innovations made eternal life accessible to broader segments of society. The coffin texts, spells written on the coffins of wealthy Egyptians, provided magical assistance for navigating the dangers of the underworld and achieving blessed existence in the afterlife. This expansion of religious privileges reflected deeper changes in Egyptian society. As the traumatic experiences of the first intermediate period had challenged traditional assumptions about divine kingship and cosmic order, the Middle Kingdom pharaohs needed to rebuild not just political authority, but also religious credibility, demonstrating that they could protect their subjects both in this world and the next. The proliferation of mortuary texts and practices served this dual purpose, providing practical benefits for individuals while reinforcing the pharaoh's role as supreme religious authority. The reign of Senusret III marked the height of Middle Kingdom power and territorial expansion. As this remarkable pharaoh combined military prowess with administrative innovation to create an Egyptian empire that extended far beyond the traditional Nile Valley borders. His campaigns into Nubia established permanent Egyptian control over the gold-rich regions to the south, while his fortresses along the Nile created a defensive network that protected Egypt's expanded territories from external threats. Picture these massive fortresses rising from the desert landscape, their walls and towers carefully positioned to control river traffic and monitor the movements of potential enemies. These weren't merely military installations, but comprehensive administrative centers that managed trade, collected taxes, and maintained Egyptian authority over vast distances. The archaeological remains of these structures reveal sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture, supply logistics, and territorial control that wouldn't be matched until much later periods. Senusret III's domestic policies proved equally revolutionary, as he systematically reduced the power of hereditary nomarchs who had contributed to the Old Kingdom's collapse. Rather than simply replacing these regional governors with royal appointees, he restructured the entire administrative system to create more direct royal control while maintaining efficient local governance. This careful balance between centralization and practical administration created governmental systems that could respond effectively to both local needs and national priorities. The cultural achievements of Senusret III's reign extended beyond military and administrative success to encompass remarkable artistic and architectural innovations. His pyramid complex at Dashur combined traditional pyramid construction with new approaches to royal burial that reflected evolving beliefs about kingship and the afterlife. The mysterious funerary complex at Abydos, where the king may actually have been buried, demonstrates the continuing importance of this ancient sacred site in Egyptian religious consciousness. The biographical inscription of the treasurer Ikenofret, who served under Senusret III, provides fascinating insights into the religious festivals and processions that maintained connections between the pharaoh and his subjects. These elaborate ceremonies at Abydos weren't mere pageantry, but essential rituals that renewed royal legitimacy and reinforced the cosmic order that guaranteed Egypt's prosperity and security. Middle Kingdom artistic achievements established new standards of technical excellence and emotional expression that distinguish this period from both earlier and later eras. Sculpture from this time displays remarkable psychological depth and individual character, moving beyond the idealized representations of Old Kingdom royal art to explore more nuanced aspects of human experience and emotion. Royal portraits from the Middle Kingdom often show careworn faces marked by the responsibilities of leadership, suggesting a more realistic understanding of kingship's burdens and challenges. The literary masterpieces of the Middle Kingdom continue to captivate readers today with their sophisticated exploration of universal themes and their elegant use of the Egyptian language at its classical peak. The story of Sinuh, perhaps the most famous of these compositions, tells the tale of a court official who flees Egypt after the death of his pharaoh, experiences adventures in foreign lands, and eventually returns home to receive royal forgiveness and honor. This isn't merely adventure story, but profound meditation on identity, loyalty, and the meaning of home that speaks across the centuries to anyone who has experienced exile or displacement. The dispute between a man and his bar explores even more fundamental questions about life, death, and the nature of existence itself. In this remarkable text, an unhappy man converses with his own soul about whether life is worth living, examining arguments for and against suicide philosophical with sophistication that rivals later Greek and Roman philosophical dialogues. The work's ultimate affirmation of life's value, despite its sorrows and disappointments, reflects Middle Kingdom wisdom about human resilience and the importance of hope in overcoming adversity. Trade relationships during the Middle Kingdom reach new levels of complexity and geographical extent, as Egyptian merchants and diplomats established connections that spanned from sub-Saharan Africa to the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. The wealth flowing into Egypt from these diverse sources funded not only monumental construction, but also the artistic and intellectual achievements that made this period a true golden age of human civilization. Egyptian expeditions to Punt, that mysterious land at the southern reaches of the Red Sea, brought back not only gold, incense, and exotic animals, but also knowledge and cultural influences that enriched Egyptian civilization in countless ways. Imagine the wonder of Egyptian courtiers seeing giraffes, leopards, and baboons for the first time, or smelling the intoxicating fragrances of myrrh and frankincense that would become essential elements of religious ritual. The technological innovations of the Middle Kingdom extended Egyptian capabilities in agriculture, manufacturing, and construction in ways that supported both population growth and cultural development. Improvements in irrigation techniques allowed cultivation of previously marginal lands, while advances in metallurgy and craftsmanship produced tools, weapons, and luxury goods of unprecedented quality and beauty. The jewelry discovered in Middle Kingdom royal burials reveals technical mastery that wouldn't be surpassed for centuries, with goldwork and precious stone settings that demonstrate both artistic vision and manufacturing precision. These weren't merely personal ornaments, but symbols of royal power and divine favor that connected earthly rulers with cosmic forces through their materials and craftsmanship. As the Middle Kingdom reached its peak under the 12th dynasty, Egypt had achieved a remarkable synthesis of political stability, economic prosperity, and cultural achievement that created one of history's most successful civilizations. The careful balance between central authority and regional autonomy, between tradition and innovation, between earthly power and divine mandate, had produced a society that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential continuity with its past. Yet even at this moment of triumph, forces were gathering that would once again test Egyptian resilience and adaptability. New peoples were moving across the ancient ideas that would challenge Near East, bringing with them technologies and traditional ways of life. The Hyksos, a group of Asiatic peoples, were beginning to establish themselves in the Nile Delta, introducing new military technologies, including horse-drawn chariots and composite bows that would revolutionize warfare throughout the region. The gradual infiltration of foreign peoples and ideas wasn't necessarily threatening in itself, as Egypt had always been a cosmopolitan civilization that absorbed useful innovations from neighboring cultures. However, the scale and pace of change during the later Middle Kingdom created pressures that would eventually overwhelm the careful balance that had sustained Egyptian prosperity for centuries. As the 13th dynasty succeeded the great pharaohs of the 12th dynasty, subtle signs of weakness began to appear in the Egyptian governmental system. Royal reigns became shorter and less stable, suggesting internal conflicts or challenges that weren't immediately apparent to outside observers. The centralized administrative systems that had served Egypt so well began to show signs of strain as regional governors once again began to assert greater independence from royal authority. The end of the Middle Kingdom wouldn't come suddenly through foreign conquest or internal revolution, but rather through the gradual erosion of the delicate systems that had sustained Egyptian unity and prosperity. Like a great tree that appears healthy until the moment it falls, Middle Kingdom Egypt maintained its outward appearance of strength and stability, even as internal weaknesses slowly undermined its foundations. The twilight of the Middle Kingdom didn't announce itself with dramatic fanfare or catastrophic events, but rather whispered its arrival through the subtle accumulation of challenges that gradually overwhelmed even the most sophisticated governmental systems. As you drift deeper into the realm of dreams, imagine the slow transformation of a civilization that had achieved remarkable heights of cultural and political achievement, only to discover that success itself could carry the seeds of future difficulties. The 13th dynasty pharaohs found themselves ruling over an Egypt that remained prosperous and culturally vibrant on the surface, yet faced mounting pressures that their predecessors hadn't encountered. The very administrative efficiency that had enabled Middle Kingdom success began to create its own problems, as bureaucratic systems grew increasingly complex and expensive to maintain. Regional governors, though theoretically subordinate to royal authority, commanded resources and loyalties that sometimes rivaled those of the pharaoh himself. During these transitional decades, Egypt's borders witnessed the gradual arrival of new peoples who would fundamentally alter the political landscape of the ancient Near East. These weren't invading armies sweeping across the desert with conquest in mind, but rather groups of migrants, traders, and settlers who established communities in the fertile Delta region and slowly integrated themselves into Egyptian society. The Hyksos, as later Egyptian sources would call them, brought with them technologies and ideas that would revolutionize warfare and governance throughout the region. The introduction of horse-drawn chariots represented more than mere military innovation. It symbolized a fundamental shift in the nature of power and mobility that challenged traditional Egyptian approaches to defense and territorial control. For centuries, Egyptian armies had relied on infantry formations and river transport to project power throughout their domains. The sight of warriors racing across the landscape in horse-drawn vehicles must have seemed almost supernatural to populations accustomed to the stately pace of traditional military movements. Composite bows, crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, provided unprecedented range and penetrating power compared to the simple wooden bows that Egyptian archers had used for millennia. These technological advantages weren't immediately decisive, but they gradually shifted the balance of military power in ways that would have profound consequences for Egyptian independence and territorial integrity. The process by which foreign influences transformed Egyptian society during this period reveals the complex dynamics of cultural exchange and adaptation that have characterized human civilization throughout history. Rather than simply imposing their will through force, the Hyksos demonstrated remarkable skill in adopting Egyptian administrative practices, religious beliefs, and artistic conventions while introducing their own innovations. This synthesis created hybrid forms of governance and culture that preserved essential Egyptian characteristics while incorporating new elements that enhanced effectiveness and adaptability. Archaeological evidence from Hyksos sites reveals a fascinating blend of Egyptian and foreign influences, with traditional Egyptian architectural forms housing foreign religious practices, and Egyptian artistic styles adapted to depict foreign deities and customs. This wasn't cultural destruction, but rather creative adaptation that demonstrated the enduring appeal of Egyptian civilization, even among those who challenged its political dominance. The gradual establishment of Hyksos authority in Lower Egypt didn't immediately threaten the pharaohs who continued to rule from Thebes in the south. For decades, Egypt effectively existed as two separate kingdoms, with the Hyksos controlling regions, while traditional the Delta and northern Egyptian dynasties maintained authority over Upper Egypt. This division might have continued indefinitely if both sides had remained content with their respective spheres of influence. However, the natural dynamics of political competition and territorial ambition eventually created conflicts that would reshape the entire ancient Near East. The Hyksos rulers, having successfully established themselves in Egypt, began to look southward toward the rich agricultural lands and mineral resources controlled by the Theban pharaohs. Meanwhile, the Egyptian rulers chafed at their reduced status and dreamed of rest, unifying their kingdom that had made their ancestors the most powerful rulers in the known world. This period of division, known to historians as the Second Intermediate Period, lasted for over a century and tested Egyptian cultural resilience in ways that would have profound consequences for the civilization's future development. Unlike the First Intermediate Period, which had resulted from internal political fragmentation, this crisis involved foreign rule that challenged fundamental assumptions about Egyptian identity and divine kingship. The Theban pharaohs who maintained independence in Upper Egypt faced the enormous challenge of preserving Egyptian traditions while adapting to new military and political realities. They couldn't simply rely on traditional approaches to governance and warfare when confronting enemies who possessed superior military technology and different cultural assumptions about power and legitimacy. This pressure for innovation would eventually produce revolutionary changes in Egyptian military organization, diplomatic practices, and imperialize the new ideology that would character kingdom period. Seqenenre-Ptah, one of the last Theban pharaohs before the wars of liberation began, exemplified the complex challenges facing Egyptian rulers during this period. Archaeological examination of his mummy reveals severe head wounds that suggest he died fighting in battle, possibly against Hyksos forces or their allies. His death wasn't merely a personal tragedy, but a symbol of the life and death struggle for Egyptian independence that was building toward a climactic confrontation. The transformation of Egyptian military capabilities during the Second Intermediate Period involved more than simply adopting foreign technologies. Egyptian craftsmen and military leaders had to completely reconceptualize their approaches to warfare, developing new training methods, logistical systems, and tactical doctrines that could effectively employ horses, chariots, and composite bows. This wasn't merely technical adaptation, but cultural revolution that would influence Egyptian society for centuries to come. Imagine the first Egyptian warriors learning to handle horses, creatures that had been unknown in the Nile Valley for millennia. These magnificent animals, with their speed, power, and intelligence, must have seemed almost mythical to people accustomed to the gentle donkeys and cattle that had previously provided their only experience with domesticated animals. The process of mastering horsemanship required not just individual skill, but entire systems of breeding, training, and care that had to be developed from scratch. The construction and maintenance of war chariots demanded innovations in woodworking, metalworking, and wheel-making that pushed Egyptian craftsmanship in entirely new directions. These vehicles weren't simply transportation, but sophisticated weapons systems that required precise balance, durability, and maneuverability to be effective in combat. The workshops that produced them became centers of technological innovation that would influence Egyptian manufacturing capabilities across multiple industries. The strategic implications of chariot warfare extended far beyond the battlefield itself, affecting everything from road construction to diplomatic protocol. Traditional Egyptian approaches to territorial control, which had relied on fortified positions and river transport, had to be supplemented with new systems that could respond to the speed and mobility of chariot-based forces. This required not just military adaptation, but comprehensive changes in administrative and logistical systems throughout Egyptian society. Ahmose, the pharaoh who would eventually expel the Hyksos and reunify Egypt, inherited both the burden of foreign occupation and the accumulated military innovations that made liberation possible. His rise to power marked the beginning of the most militaristic period in Egyptian history, as the trauma of foreign rule created a national determination to never again allow external enemies to threaten Egyptian independence. The campaigns that drove the Hyksos from Egypt represented more than simple military conquest. They constituted a national awakening that would transform Egyptian civilization from a relatively peaceful kingdom focused on internal development into an aggressive imperial power determined to dominate its neighbors. This transformation wasn't merely political, but psychological, as the Egyptian people developed a new understanding of their place in the world and their responsibilities as defenders of civilization against barbarian chaos. The siege of Avaris, the Hyksos capital in the Delta, became a symbol of Egyptian determination and military prowess that would inspire pharaonic propaganda for centuries. The systematic reduction of this fortified city required not just courage and persistence, but sophisticated siege techniques that demonstrated Egyptian adaptation of foreign military innovations. The final assault on the city's walls marked not just the end of Hyksos rule, but the birth of the new kingdom as a dominant force in ancient Near Eastern politics. The expulsion of the Hyksos didn't end with their departure from Egyptian, but continued with pursuit campaigns that carried Egyptian armies into Canaan and Syria for the first time in the nation's history. This expansion beyond traditional borders represented a fundamental shift in Egyptian strategic thinking, as pharaonic planners concluded that true security required controlling potential threats at their source, rather than simply defending Egypt's traditional boundaries. Ahmose's establishment of the 18th dynasty marked the beginning of what historians call the New Kingdom, a period that would see Egyptian power reach unprecedented heights and Egyptian influence spread throughout the ancient world. This wasn't merely territorial expansion, but cultural diffusion, as Egyptian ideas about art, religion, and governance influenced civilizations from Nubia to Mesopotamia. The New Kingdom pharaohs inherited not just restored independence, but also military capabilities and ambitions that would drive imperial Egyptian expansion for the next 5 centuries. The trauma of Hyksos rule had convinced Egyptian leaders that passive defense was insufficient. True security required active dominance over neighboring regions and peoples who might otherwise threaten Egyptian interests. The religious implications of liberation and reunification proved as significant as the political and military consequences. The successful expulsion of foreign rulers was interpreted as divine vindication of Egyptian religious beliefs and confirmation that the pharaoh truly enjoyed the favor of the gods. This religious confidence would fuel missionary activities and temple construction projects that spread Egyptian influence throughout the expanded empire. Amun, the Theban god who had protected the southern pharaohs during their struggle against the Hyksos, experienced a remarkable elevation in status that would make him the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon. The fusion of Amun with Re, the traditional solar deity, created Amun-Re, a composite god whose authority reflected the political unification that had restored Egyptian greatness. This religious innovation provided theological justification for imperial expansion while maintaining connections to traditional Egyptian beliefs and practices. The wealth that flowed into Egypt from conquered territories and tribute-paying vassals funded construction projects that surpassed even the great pyramids of the Old Kingdom in their scale and magnificence. The temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor became showcases of Egyptian power and artistic achievement, their massive columns and elaborate decorations proclaiming pharaonic glory to visitors from throughout the known world. These monuments weren't merely expressions of royal ego, but functioning religious institutions that maintained the divine relationships essential for Egyptian prosperity and security. The daily rituals performed in their sacred precincts ensured continued divine favor, while their festivals and processions reinforced social cohesion and imperial ideology among both Egyptian citizens and foreign subjects. The development of professional military forces during the early New Kingdom created career opportunities for ambitious young men, while providing pharaohs with reliable instruments for imperial expansion. Unlike the seasonal militias that had characterized earlier periods, these standing armies could campaign year-round and maintain permanent garrisons in conquered territories. The emergence of a military aristocracy based on battlefield achievement rather than hereditary status introduced new social dynamics that would influence Egyptian society for centuries. Egyptian diplomatic relations during the New Kingdom reflected the civilization's new status as a major imperial power capable of negotiating with distant kingdoms on equal terms. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and rulers throughout the ancient Near East, reveal complex networks of alliance, tribute, and mutual recognition that connected Egypt to a truly international system of states and principalities. Marriage diplomacy became a crucial tool of imperial policy, as pharaohs married daughters of foreign rulers to cement alliances while carefully avoiding reciprocal arrangements that might diminish Egyptian prestige. These foreign queens brought with them not just political advantages but cultural influences that enriched Egyptian court life and artistic expression. The reign of Thutmose III represented the military peak of New Kingdom expansion, as this warrior pharaoh conducted 17 campaigns that established Egyptian hegemony from Nubia to the Euphrates River. His victory at the Battle of Megiddo became legendary in Egyptian military annals, while his systematic reduction of fortified cities throughout Canaan and Syria demonstrated Egyptian mastery of siege warfare and territorial administration. Picture the magnificent sight of Thutmose III's army on the march. Thousands of infantry soldiers accompanied by chariot squadrons, their bronze weapons gleaming in the desert sun as they advanced toward distant battlefields. The logistical achievement required to supply and coordinate such forces across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain rivaled any military organization in the ancient world. The administrative systems developed to govern the Egyptian empire required innovations in record-keeping, communication, and personnel management that influenced governmental practices throughout the region. Provincial governors, military commanders, and tribute collectors formed bureaucratic networks that extended pharaonic authority across vast distances while maintaining efficient communication with the central government in Egypt. The cultural impact of imperial expansion flowed in both directions, as Egyptian ideas and practices influenced conquered peoples, while foreign influences enriched Egyptian civilization in return. This wasn't simple domination, but complex cultural exchange that created hybrid forms of art, religion, and governance throughout the Egyptian sphere of influence. Trade networks that had connected Egypt to neighboring regions for millennia expanded dramatically during the New Kingdom, carrying Egyptian manufactured goods to distant markets, while bringing exotic materials and luxury items back to the Nile Valley. The wealth generated by this commercial expansion funded both military campaigns and monumental construction projects that proclaimed Egyptian greatness to the world. Egyptian technological innovations during this period extended beyond military applications to encompass advances in metallurgy, engineering, and craftsmanship that influenced civilizations throughout the ancient Near East. The development of new bronze alloys improved both weapons and tools, while architectural innovations enabled the construction of monuments that defied previous limitations of scale and complexity. The religious syncretism that characterized New Kingdom Egypt reflected the civilization's new cosmopolitan character, as Egyptian theologians incorporated foreign deities and practices into traditional belief systems while maintaining essential doctrinal continuity. This flexibility enabled Egyptian religion to adapt to imperial conditions, while preserving its distinctive identity and of New Kingdom prosperity appeal. The height and cultural achievement would be reached during the reigns of Amenhotep III and his son, the revolutionary pharaoh, who would be remembered as Akhenaten. These rulers presided over an Egypt that had achieved unprecedented wealth, territorial extent, and cultural influence. Yet their very success would create new challenges that would test Egyptian adaptability in unexpected ways. As you sink deeper into peaceful slumber, envision the golden age of Egyptian imperial glory, when pharaonic armies marched triumphant across distant lands, while massive temples rose from the Nile Valley to proclaim eternal Egyptian greatness. This was civilization at its most magnificent, yet even in its moment of greatest triumph, the seeds of future transformation were already beginning to germinate in ways that would surprise both contemporary observers and modern historians alike. The wealth and power that characterized peak New Kingdom Egypt created possibilities for innovation and experimentation that would produce some of history's most remarkable individuals and revolutionary ideas. The stage was being set for religious upheavals, artistic breakthroughs, and political crises that would test every assumption about pharaonic authority and divine mandate that had sustained Egyptian civilization for over a millennium. The opulent court of Amenhotep III represented Egyptian civilization at its most magnificent zenith, where unprecedented wealth from tribute and trade had created a world of luxury that seemed to validate every claim of divine favor and imperial destiny. Gold flowed into Egypt from Nubian mines in quantities that staggered foreign ambassadors, while exotic goods from across the known world filled royal storehouses with treasures that proclaimed pharaonic supremacy to any who might doubt Egyptian power. The pharaoh himself lived like a god among mortals, surrounded by palatial splendor that transformed daily life into continuous ceremony celebrating the divine nature of kingship. Imagine walking through the vast halls of Amenhotep III's palace at Malglekata, where walls seamed with precious metals and vibrant paintings depicted the pharaoh receiving tribute from conquered nations, while gods showered him with symbols of eternal life. The very air seemed to shimmer with incense and perfume, while the soft rustle of silk garments and the gentle chiming of golden ornaments created an atmosphere of otherworldly refinement. This wasn't merely royal extravagance, but the physical manifestation of Egyptian beliefs about divine kingship made visible in earthly form. The artistic achievements of this golden age pushed Egyptian creative expression to heights that would never again be equaled, as court artists experimented with new techniques and subjects that reflected the cosmopolitan character of imperial Egypt. Sculpture achieved unprecedented realism and emotional depth, while painting incorporated influences from across the empire to create hybrid styles that maintained Egyptian identity while embracing international sophistication. The tomb paintings of nobles from this period reveal not just personal wealth, but cultural confidence that enabled creative exploration without fear of losing essential Egyptian character. Yet beneath this glittering surface of prosperity and achievement, subtle tensions were building that would soon explode into the most dramatic religious revolution in Egyptian history. The very success that had elevated Egypt to imperial dominance had also created conditions that challenged traditional beliefs and practices in ways that previous generations could never have anticipated. Foreign influences, accumulated over centuries of conquest and trade, had introduced ideas and perspectives that slowly undermined confidence in established religious doctrines and social hierarchies. The priesthood of Amun, enriched by centuries of royal patronage and military victory, had grown into a powerful institution that rivaled pharaonic authority in wealth and influence. Temple estates controlled vast agricultural territories, while priestly hierarchies administered religious and economic systems that operated with increasing independence from direct royal control. This wasn't necessarily threatening in itself, but it created alternative power centers that could potentially challenge pharaonic supremacy if circumstances ever aligned against the throne. Into this world of magnificent complexity was born a prince who would become one of history's most controversial and revolutionary figures. Amenhotep IV, the son of Amenhotep III, inherited an empire at its peak, yet possessed a vision of religious truth that would shatter traditional Egyptian beliefs and transform the ancient world's understanding of divinity itself. His transformation into Akhenaten represents one of humanity's earliest recorded examples of individual conscience challenging established religious authority. The young prince's religious awak broader occur in isolation, but reflecting did an intellectual currents that had been developing within Egyptian theological circles for generations. Solar worship, which had ancient roots in Egyptian religion, was experiencing renewed emphasis as theologued concepts of universalians explore divine power that transcended traditional polytheistic limitations. The identification of Re with various local deities had created precedents for religious synthesis that made more radical innovations conceivable. Akhenaten's revolutionary insight involved recognizing the Aten, the solar disk, as the sole source of divine power and the only god worthy of worship. This wasn't merely religious reform, but theological revolution that challenged every assumption about divine nature and cosmic order that had sustained Egyptian civilization for millennia. The young pharaoh's conviction that traditional gods were false idols, requiring elimination, represented a complete break with ancestral beliefs that had proven their effectiveness through centuries of Egyptian prosperity and success. Picture the shock that rippled through Egyptian society as Akhenaten began implementing his religious revolution with the fervor of absolute certainty. Ancient temples that had served as focal points of community life for generations suddenly found their rituals forbidden and their priests dismissed. The names of traditional gods were chiseled from monuments throughout the kingdom, while new inscriptions proclaimed the exclusive divinity of the Aten and the pharaoh's role as sole intermediary between humanity and divine truth. The establishment of Akhenaten, the new capital city dedicated exclusively to Aten worship, represented the most dramatic break with Egyptian tradition in the civilization's recorded history. Located at what modern archaeologists call Amarna, this revolutionary city was designed according to entirely new principles that reflected Akhenaten's theological vision rather than traditional Egyptian urban planning concepts. The absence of temples dedicated to traditional gods created a sacred landscape that proclaimed the Aten's exclusive divinity while demonstrating the pharaoh's absolute commitment to religious transformation. The artistic revolution that accompanied Akhenaten's religious reforms produced some of the most distinctive and emotionally powerful art in Egyptian history. The rigid conventions that had governed Egyptian artistic expression for millennia were suddenly abandoned in favor of naturalistic styles that emphasized individual personality and emotional authenticity. Royal portraits from this period show Akhenaten with elongated features and feminine characteristics that would have been unthinkable in traditional pharaonic art, while family scenes depict intimate moments of affection and domesticity that humanize the royal family in unprecedented ways. Nefertiti, Akhenaten's remarkable queen, emerged as a central figure in the artistic and religious revolution that transformed Egyptian culture during this extraordinary period. Her famous limestone bust, discovered at Amarna and now housed in Berlin, represents not just individual beauty, but the new artistic ideals that emphasized grace, refinement, and spiritual transcendence over the heroic monumentality that had characterized earlier royal portraiture. She appears in temple reliefs performing religious rituals alongside her husband, demonstrating female participation in divine worship that challenged traditional gender roles within Egyptian religious practice. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence discovered at Akhenaten, reveal the international context within which Akhenaten's religious revolution unfolded. These cuneiform tablets document ongoing diplomatic relationships with rulers throughout the ancient Near East, demonstrating that Egypt's internal religious transformation occurred within a broader world of competing empires and shifting political alliances. Foreign rulers continued to seek Egyptian support and alliance, suggesting that Akhenaten's reforms didn't immediately undermine Egypt's international standing. However, the administrative challenges created by sudden religious transformation began to strain the governmental systems that had sustained Egyptian prosperity for centuries. Traditional temple institutions had provided not just religious services, but also economic coordination, social welfare, and educational functions that couldn't easily be replaced by new institutions dedicated exclusively to Aten worship. The disruption of established systems created administrative gaps that affected everything from agricultural production to military recruitment. The military implications of Akhenaten's religious revolution became apparent as traditional warrior traditions, closely tied to gods like Amun and Ptah, lost their institutional support and ideological foundation. Professional soldiers who had served Egyptian expansion for generations found their traditional religious observances forbidden, while new military policies reflected Akhenaten's apparent preference for peaceful coexistence over aggressive expansion. This shift in military priorities may have contributed to Egypt's gradual loss of territorial control in Syria and Canaan. The psychological impact of such radical religious transformation on ordinary Egyptians must have been profound and disorienting. Imagine farmers who had worshipped Osiris for agricultural fertility suddenly being told that their ancestral practices were false and harmful. Craftsmen who had created images of traditional gods throughout their careers faced the choice between abandoning their life's work or continuing practices that were now officially condemned. The social fabric that had bound Egyptian communities together through shared religious observance was suddenly torn apart by royal decree. Despite the revolutionary character of Akhenaten's reforms, significant elements of traditional Egyptian culture persisted throughout the Amarna period. The hieroglyphic writing system continued unchanged, while basic administrative procedures and legal practices maintained continuity with earlier periods. This suggests that the religious revolution, however dramatic, affected primarily elite religious and artistic circles, rather than fundamentally transforming the daily lives of most Egyptians. The personal devotion that Akhenaten demonstrated toward his religious vision created some of the most moving expressions of individual faith in ancient literature. The great hymn to the Aten, possibly composed by the pharaoh himself, reveals profound spiritual insight and poetic sensibility that transcends the political circumstances. The text of its creation's celebration of universal divine love and its recognition of the Aten's care for all creation, including foreign peoples traditionally considered enemies, represents a remarkable expansion of religious consciousness that anticipated later developments in world religion. Yet even as Akhenaten pursued his religious vision with unwavering determination, practical challenges mounted that threatened the stability of his revolutionary regime. The economic disruption caused by closing traditional temples created unemployment and social unrest, while the administrative confusion resulting from rapid institutional change undermined governmental efficiency. Foreign territories began asserting independence as Egyptian military attention focused on internal religious transformation rather than imperial maintenance. The isolation of Akhenaten from traditional Egyptian religious centers may have intensified the pharaoh's religious fervor while reducing his awareness of growing opposition throughout the kingdom. Surrounded by devoted followers who shared his theological vision, Akhenaten may have genuinely believed that his reforms were succeeding even as resistance built within traditional power centers that retained loyalty to ancestral gods and practices. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Akhenaten's death and the immediate aftermath of his reign suggest that his religious revolution faced determined opposition that ultimately proved successful in restoring traditional beliefs and practices. The rapid abandonment of Akhenaten and the systematic destruction of Aten-related monuments indicate coordinated efforts to erase the memory of religious innovations that had challenged fundamental assumptions about Egyptian identity and divine authority. Tutankhamun's accession to the throne marked the beginning of a systematic restoration of traditional Egyptian religion and culture that would erase most traces of the Amarna experiment within a single generation. The young pharaoh's name change from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun symbolized the triumph of traditional theology over revolutionary innovation, while his court's return to Memphis and Thebes abandoned the isolated capital that had served as the center of religious transformation. The treasures discovered in Tutankhamun's tomb reveal the remarkable craftsmanship and artistic achievement that characterized Egyptian civilization, even during periods of political and religious upheaval. Golden funerary goods of extraordinary beauty and technical sophistication demonstrate the resilience of Egyptian artistic traditions and the continued availability of resources for royal burial despite the disruptions of the Amarna period. The tomb's contents also reflect the restoration of traditional mortuary practices that ensured the young pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife according to ancestral beliefs. Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's intact tomb in 1922 created international sensation that renewed global fascination with ancient Egyptian civilization and demonstrated the enduring appeal of pharaonic culture across millennia of historical change. The systematic excavation and documentation of the tomb's contents provided unprecedented insights into royal burial practices and artistic achievement, while creating iconic images that continue to shape popular understanding of ancient Egypt. The restoration period that followed the Amarna experiment involved more than simply returning to pre-revolutionary practices. It required active reconstruction of institutions and traditions that had been disrupted or destroyed during Akhenaten's reign. Priests had to be retrained, temples rebuilt, and religious festivals re-established according to traditional patterns that many participants remembered only imperfectly. This process of cultural restoration demonstrated the remarkable resilience of Egyptian civilization and its capacity to recover from even the most dramatic internal challenges. Horemheb's rise to power marked the definitive end of the 18th dynasty and the beginning of a new era that would see Egyptian military power restored under pharaohs determined to reclaim the empire's former territorial extent and international prestige. His background as a military commander rather than a member of the royal family reflected the importance of restored military effectiveness in legitimizing pharaonic authority after the disruptions of the Amarna period. The systematic destruction of monuments and records from Akhenaten's reign represented more than mere political revenge. It constituted an attempt to erase historical memory of religious experimentation that had challenged fundamental assumptions about Egyptian identity and divine authority. This damnatio memoriae succeeded so completely that Akhenaten's name disappeared from official king lists, and knowledge of his existence was lost until modern archaeological discoveries recovered evidence of his revolutionary reign. The 19th dynasty pharaohs who succeeded Horemheb inherited both restored religious orthodoxy and renewed imperial ambitions that would drive Egyptian expansion to its final peaks of territorial extent and cultural influence. Seti I and his son, Ramesses II, would pursue aggressive military campaigns designed to restore Egyptian hegemony over territories lost during the Amarna period, while demonstrating that traditional Egyptian values and institutions remained superior to foreign alternatives. The reign of Ramesses II represented the last great flowering of Egyptian imperial power, as this remarkable pharaoh combined military prowess with monumental construction projects that proclaimed Egyptian greatness throughout the ancient world. His 67-year reign provided stability and continuity that enabled comprehensive restoration of institutions and traditions that had been disrupted during the previous century of religious and political upheaval. Picture the massive temple complex at Abu Simbel, carved directly from living rock to commemorate Ramesses II's military victories and divine authority. The colossal statues of the pharaoh that dominate the facade weren't merely artistic achievements, but political statements that proclaimed Egyptian power to any who might challenge pharaonic supremacy. The temple's interior chambers, decorated with scenes of royal triumph over foreign enemies, served both religious and propaganda purposes that reinforced Egyptian imperial ideology. The Battle of Kadesh, fought between Egyptian and Hittite forces in Syria, became the subject of extensive royal propaganda that portrayed Ramesses II as a heroic warrior who achieved victory through personal courage and divine favor. Archaeological evidence suggests that the actual battle may have been less decisive than royal inscriptions claimed, but the literary and artistic treatments of this conflict created enduring images of pharaonic martial prowess that influenced Egyptian cultural memory for centuries. The peace treaty concluded between Egypt and the Hittite Empire following their Syrian conflicts represents one of history's earliest recorded international agreements, and that characterized later demonstrates the sophisticated diplomatic practices New Kingdom foreign relations. The treaty's provisions for mutual defense, extradition of fugitives, and diplomatic immunity established precedents for international law that influenced subsequent agreements throughout the ancient Near East. Egyptian territorial control during Ramesses II's reign extended from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north, creating an empire that rivaled any contemporary political entity in geographical extent and economic resources. The wealth generated by tribute, trade, and territorial exploitation funded construction projects that transformed the Nile Valley into a showcase of monumental architecture that proclaimed Egyptian greatness to visitors from throughout the known world. The workforce required for these massive construction projects included not only Egyptian laborers, but also prisoners of war, foreign craftsmen, and tribute workers from throughout the empire. This diverse labor force brought with it cultural influences and technical skills that enriched Egyptian civilization, while demonstrating the cosmopolitan character of New Kingdom society at its imperial peak. The religious conservatism that characterized the post-Amarna restoration created theological systems that emphasized traditional Egyptian beliefs, while incorporating elements from the empire's diverse territories and populations. This synthesis preserved essential Egyptian identity while adapting to the realities of governing a multi-ethnic empire that included peoples with their own religious traditions and cultural practices. The gradual weakening of Egyptian during the later imperial power. New Kingdom resulted not from sudden military defeat, but from the accumulated strain of maintaining territorial control over vast distances while managing internal challenges that included succession disputes, economic pressures, and foreign population movements. The Sea Peoples, mysterious groups who disrupted civilizations throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, created additional challenges that tested Egyptian military capabilities and administrative systems. Ramesses III's successful defense of Egypt against Sea People's invasions represented one of the last great military achievements of pharaonic civilization, demonstrating that Egyptian military traditions retained their effectiveness even as the broader imperial system faced mounting challenges. The walls of his battles depicted on Mortuary Temple at Medine Habu provide rare visual documentation of ancient naval warfare while celebrating Egyptian victory over foreign invaders. The economic strain of constant military campaigns and monumental construction projects gradually undermined the fiscal foundations of Egyptian imperial power. As tribute from distant territories became increasingly unreliable, while domestic resources faced pressure from population growth and environmental challenges. The debasement of Egyptian currency and the inflation of commodity prices reflected broader economic problems that affected all levels of society. The fragmentation of royal authority during the later New Kingdom created opportunities for powerful priests, military commanders, and regional governors to assert greater independence from central control. The high priests of Amun at Thebes accumulated wealth and authority that rivaled pharaonic power, while military leaders established hereditary positions that challenged traditional concepts of royal appointment and dismissal. As the New Kingdom gradually dissolved into the Third Intermediate Period, Egypt experienced another mentation and of political cycled foreign influence that would test the civilization's capacity for survival and renewal. Yet even in decline, Egyptian cultural achievements continued to influence neighboring civilizations while preserving essential traditions that would enable future restoration under different leadership and changed circumstances. The Nubian pharaohs, who would eventually reunite Egypt during the 25th dynasty, brought with them deep reverence for traditional Egyptian culture combined with military effectiveness that restored pharaonic authority throughout the Nile Valley. These foreign rulers paradoxically proved more committed to preserving Egyptian traditions than many native eyes had been, demonstrating the enduring appeal of pharaonic civilization across ethnic and cultural boundaries. The Assyrian invasions that terminated Nubian rule in Egypt marked the beginning of a series of foreign dominations that would characterize the late period of Egyptian history. Yet even under Persian, Greek, and Roman control, Egyptian civilization maintained its distinctive identity while adapting to new political and cultural circumstances that required creative synthesis of traditional and foreign elements. As you drift deeper into peaceful slumber, envision the eternal Nile continuing its ancient journey toward the sea, carrying with it the dreams and achievements of countless generations who built their lives along its banks. The great monuments they created still stand as testimony to human ambition and divine inspiration, while their stories continue to captivate imaginations across the centuries that separate us from their remarkable world. The legacy of ancient Egypt extends far beyond archaeological remains and museum collections to encompass fundamental concepts about kingship, religious authority, and monumental architecture that influenced civilizations throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic titles and symbols, while early Christian monasticism drew inspiration from ancient Egyptian religious practices that emphasized individual spiritual development within community contexts. The preservation of Egyptian cultural memory through Greek and Roman sources ensured that pharaonic achievements would inspire Renaissance artists, Enlightenment philosophers, and modern scholars who continue to discover new aspects of this remarkable civilization. Each archaeological discovery adds new chapters to our understanding while confirming the sophistication and creativity that characterized ancient Egyptian society throughout its long history. The hieroglyphic writing system, finally deciphered in the 19th century, opened windows into ancient Egyptian consciousness that reveal not just historical facts, but also literary achievements, religious insights, and personal experiences that connect us directly to individuals who lived and died along the Nile thousands of years ago. Their voices speak across the centuries with humor, wisdom, and humanity, that transcend cultural and temporal boundaries. Tonight, as ancient Egyptian kings and queens visit your dreams, remember that their civilization represents one of humanity's greatest achievements in creating stable, prosperous, and culturally rich societies that endured longer than any other political system in recorded history. Their success demonstrates the human capacity for organization, creativity, and spiritual insight that continues to inspire and challenge us in our own efforts to build meaningful lives and lasting institutions. The eternal mystery of ancient Egypt lies not just in its monuments and treasures, but in its demonstration that human beings can create civilizations of extraordinary beauty, complexity, and endurance when they successfully balance individual ambition with collective purpose, earthly concerns with spiritual aspirations, and respect for tradition with openness to beneficial change. These lessons remain as relevant today as they were 4,000 years ago, when pharaohs ruled from golden thrones and the pyramids cast their shadows across the eternal sands of time. The gradual transformation of Egyptian civilization during the late period reveals how even the most enduring cultures must adapt to survive in a changing world. As foreign powers established dominance over the Nile Valley, Egyptian priests and scribes became the guardians of ancient traditions, preserving sacred knowledge in temple libraries, while serving rulers whose ancestors had never gazed upon the pyramids or participated in the mysteries of pharaonic kingship. Picture the Persian satrap Cambyses entering Memphis in 525 BC, his conquering army having swept aside the last native pharaoh's resistance with the efficiency that had built the largest empire the world had yet seen. Yet this moment of apparent triumph contained within it the seeds of cultural synthesis that would transform both conqueror and conquered. The Persians, despite their military superiority, recognized the administrative wisdom embedded in Egyptian governmental systems that had functioned effectively for millennia. The Persian approach to ruling Egypt demonstrated sophisticated understanding of imperial governance that preserved local institutions while integrating them into broader administrative networks. Rather than imposing alien systems upon unwilling subjects, Persian administrators adopted Egyptian religious practices, maintained traditional festivals, and even assumed pharaonic titles that legitimized their authority according to ancient customs. This pragmatic flexibility enabled relatively smooth transition from native to foreign rule while preserving cultural continuities that might otherwise have been disrupted. Egyptian priests during the Persian period found themselves serving dual roles as guardians of traditional knowledge and intermediaries between foreign rulers and native populations. Their deep understanding of Egyptian customs, languages, and administrative practices made them invaluable to Persian officials who needed reliable local expertise to govern effectively. This collaboration wasn't mere opportunism, but practical necessity that benefited both parties while preserving essential elements of Egyptian civilization. The religious tolerance that characterized Persian rule in Egypt reflected broader imperial policies that recognized the practical wisdom of accommodating local beliefs rather than attempting to impose uniform religious practices throughout diverse territories. Persian rulers participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, funded temple construction projects, and maintained the elaborate ritual cycles that had sustained Egyptian spiritual life for millennia. This approach created hybrid forms of governance that combined Persian administrative efficiency with Egyptian religious authority. Archaeological evidence from Persian period sites reveals the complex cultural exchanges that occurred when Iranian administrative practices encountered Egyptian institutional traditions. Aramaic became the language of imperial administration, while Egyptian continued to serve religious and cultural functions, creating bilingual environments where scribes needed mastery of multiple writing systems and languages to function effectively in their professional roles. The economic policies implemented during Persian rule attempted to balance imperial revenue requirements with Egyptian productive capabilities. recognizing that excessive taxation could undermine the agricultural and commercial systems that generated the wealth supporting imperial operations. Persian administrators studied Egyptian irrigation techniques, harvest cycles, and trade networks to optimize tributary relationships, while maintaining the prosperity that made Egypt valuable to the empire. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt during the Persian period, recorded detailed observations about Egyptian customs and beliefs that provide invaluable insights into how ancient traditions appeared to foreign observers. His accounts reveal both admiration for Egyptian achievements and puzzlement at practices that seemed strange or irrational to Greek sensibilities. These cultural encounters between different worldviews created opportunities for intellectual exchange that enriched all participants. The Persian Wars that engulfed the eastern Mediterranean created opportunities for Egyptian rebellion that temporarily restored native rule under pharaohs who promised to eliminate foreign influence and restore traditional values. These nationalist movements drew upon deep cultural memories of pharaonic greatness, while adapting to contemporary military and political realities that required new approaches to governance and defense. Nectanebo I and his successors of the 30th dynasty represented the last flowering of native Egyptian pharaonic power, demonstrating remarkable military skill and diplomatic cunning in maintaining independence against Persian attempts at reconquest. Their fortification projects along the Nile Delta and their alliances with Greek city-states showed sophisticated understanding of contemporary geopolitical dynamics, while drawing inspiration from ancient Egyptian imperial traditions. The massive temple construction projects undertaken during the 30th dynasty reflected both religious devotion and political calculation, as these pharaohs sought to demonstrate divine approval for their rule while providing employment for skilled craftsmen and laborers. The Temple of Isis at Philae, begun during this period, became one of the most beautiful examples of late Egyptian architecture, while serving as a center for religious practices that would continue for centuries after pharaonic rule ended. The arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BC marked another transformation in Egyptian political arrangements, as the young Macedonian conqueror brought with him Greek cultural influences that would profoundly affect Egyptian civilization, while drawing inspiration from pharaonic traditions for his own imperial ambitions. Alexander's pilgrimage to the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa demonstrated his recognition of Egyptian religious authority and his desire to legitimize his rule through divine sanction. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by Alexander's general, created one of the most successful examples of Hellenistic kingship, combining Macedonian military traditions with Egyptian administrative practices and Greek intellectual culture. These rulers adopted pharaonic titles and religious roles while maintaining Greek identity and cultural preferences, creating hybrid forms of governance that preserved Egyptian institutions while introducing new elements from the broader Mediterranean world. Alexandria, the great city founded by Alexander and expanded by the Ptolemies, became the intellectual capital of the ancient world, its famous library and museum attracting scholars from throughout the Mediterranean basin. Here, Greek philosophers studied Egyptian wisdom traditions, while Egyptian priests learned Greek philosophy, creating synthetic intellectual movements that influenced religious and philosophical development throughout the Hellenistic world. The Rosetta Stone, carved during the reign of Ptolemy V, symbolizes the multilingual character of Ptolemaic Egypt, where hieroglyphic Egyptian, Demotic script, and Greek coexisted within a single administrative and cultural system. This linguistic diversity reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Ptolemaic society, while preserving Egyptian cultural identity within broader Mediterranean contexts. Egyptian religious practices during the Ptolemaic period experienced both preservation and transformation, as traditional beliefs encountered Greek philosophical concepts and mystery religions from throughout the Mediterranean world. The cult of Serapis, created by combining aspects of Osiris with Greek divine attributes, demonstrates how religious syncretism could create new forms of worship that appeal to diverse populations while maintaining essential spiritual functions. The economic prosperity that characterized early Ptolemaic rule resulted from efficient exploitation of Egypt's agricultural resources, combined with Alexandria's strategic position as a center for Mediterranean trade. Egyptian grain fed much of the Greek world, while luxury goods from Africa and Asia passed through Alexandria's harbors on their way to European markets. This commercial success funded the cultural achievements that made Ptolemaic Egypt a center of learning and artistic production. The gradual weakening of Ptolemaic power during the later centuries of their rule reflected both internal succession disputes and external pressure from the expanding Roman Republic. Civil wars between rival claimants to the throne disrupted governmental efficiency, while Roman intervention in Egyptian affairs reduced Ptolemaic independence and territorial control. Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh of Egypt, embodied the complex cultural synthesis that had characterized Ptolemaic rule, while demonstrating remarkable political skill in her attempts to preserve Egyptian independence against Roman expansion. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony represented sophisticated diplomatic strategies designed to protect Egyptian interests through alliance with powerful Roman leaders. The Battle of Actium in 31 BC marked the end of pharaonic rule that had lasted for over 3 millennia, as Octavian's victory over Antony and Cleopatra brought Egypt under direct Roman control for the first time. Yet this political transformation didn't immediately eliminate Egyptian cultural identity or institutional traditions that had proven their resilience through centuries of foreign domination. Roman rule in Egypt combined administration with careful, efficient imperial preservation of local customs and religious practices that maintained social stability while generating revenue for imperial operations. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic titles and participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, demonstrating the enduring appeal of pharaonic symbolism, even among rulers whose cultural backgrounds lay far from the Nile Valley. The economic integration of Egypt into the Roman Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange, as Egyptian ideas about religion, medicine, and mathematics spread throughout Roman territories, while Roman legal concepts and administrative practices influenced Egyptian society. This mutual influence enriched both civilizations while creating new synthetic forms of culture that combined elements from multiple traditions. Egyptian religious practices during the Roman period experienced remarkable expansion beyond their traditional geographical boundaries, as mystery religions based on Egyptian deities attracted devotees throughout the Roman world. The cult of Isis became particularly popular among women and marginalized populations who found in Egyptian religious traditions spiritual resources unavailable in traditional Roman religion. The rise of Christianity in Egypt created complex interactions between Egyptian religious traditions and new monotheistic beliefs that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine nature and cosmic order. Egyptian monasticism, which emerged during the 3rd and 4th centuries, drew upon pharaonic traditions of religious devotion while adapting them to serve Christian spiritual needs. The Coptic language, which evolved from ancient Egyptian while incorporating Greek vocabulary and Christian terminology, enabled the preservation of Egyptian cultural identity within Christian contexts while facilitating communication between Egyptian Christians and their co-religionists throughout the Mediterranean world. Coptic literature includes both translations of Greek Christian texts and original works that reflect distinctly Egyptian approaches to Christian theology and spirituality. The Arab conquest of Egypt in 641 AD brought another wave of cultural transformation that gradually replaced Coptic Christianity and Greco-Roman administrative systems with Islamic institutions and Arabic language. Yet even this dramatic change didn't completely eliminate Egyptian cultural distinctiveness, as Islamic Egypt developed its own characteristics that reflected the influence of pharaonic and Coptic traditions upon Arabian cultural imports. Medieval Islamic scholars in Egypt preserved and transmitted ancient Egyptian knowledge about mathematics, medicine, and astronomy, while developing new synthetic approaches that combined Egyptian practical wisdom with Islamic theoretical frameworks. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad included Egyptian scholars whose contributions to Islamic intellectual development reflected the continuing vitality of Egyptian learning traditions. The rediscovery of ancient Egypt during the 18th and 19th centuries created renewed global fascination with pharaonic achievements, while providing scientific methodologies for understanding Egyptian civilization through archaeological investigation and linguistic analysis. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt included scholars whose systematic study of Egyptian monuments laid foundations for modern Egyptology. The decipherment of hieroglyphic writing by Jean-François Champollion in 1822 opened new windows into ancient Egyptian consciousness, revealing literary achievements, religious insights, and historical records that had remained silent for over a millennium. This breakthrough enabled direct communication across the centuries with ancient Egyptian voices that spoke of love, loss, hope, and transcendence, with emotions that remain recognizable to contemporary readers. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, while confirming the sophistication and creativity that characterized pharaonic society throughout its long development. Each tomb excavated, each papyrus translated, each temple restored adds new dimensions to our understanding, while demonstrating the enduring relevance of Egyptian achievements for contemporary human development. The influence of ancient Egyptian civilization extends far beyond academic study to encompass fundamental concepts about monumental architecture, religious symbol societies, Egyptianism, and governmental organization that continue to inspire contemporary architectural principles, influence Greek and Roman construction, while providing precedents for modern public buildings that seek to convey permanence and authority through their design. The concept of divine kingship developed in ancient Egypt influenced political theories throughout history, while providing symbolic resources for leaders who sought to legitimize their authority through connection with transcendent values. Even secular governments often employ architectural and ceremonial elements that derive ultimately from pharaonic precedents. Egyptian religious concepts about individual soul survival and moral judgment influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while providing frameworks for understanding death and afterlife that continue to shape human responses to mortality. The Egyptian emphasis on moral behavior as prerequisite for spiritual advancement anticipated later religious developments while demonstrating sophisticated ethical thinking. The Egyptian achievement in creating stable, prosperous, and culturally rich civilization that endured for over 3,000 years demonstrates human potential for building societies that balance individual fulfillment with collective welfare. Their success resulted from careful attention to both practical necessities and spiritual aspirations that created comprehensive approaches to human development. Egyptian artistic achievements continue to inspire contemporary creative expression through their combination of technical mastery with spiritual vision that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. The emotional power of Egyptian sculpture and painting derives from artists' ability to capture both individual personality and universal human characteristics within forms that suggest eternal significance. The Egyptian approach to preserving cultural memory through monumental architecture and written records provides models for contemporary societies seeking to maintain historical continuity while adapting to changing circumstances. Their understanding that civilization requires both innovation and preservation offers wisdom for navigating the challenges of rapid social and technological change. As you rest in peaceful slumber, imagine yourself walking through the Valley of the Kings at sunset, when the golden light transforms limestone cliffs into glowing monuments to human ambition and divine inspiration. The tombs carved into these sacred hills preserve not just royal remains, but eternal testimonies to human creativity and spiritual aspiration that continue to inspire wonder and reflection. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that cover these tomb walls speak across millennia, with voices that remain startlingly human in their hopes, fears, and dreams. These ancient Egyptians faced the same fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and transcendence that confront every generation. Yet their responses demonstrate remarkable wisdom and insight that enriches our own understanding of human possibility. The preservation of Egyptian civilization through thousands of years of political change demonstrates the power of cultural traditions that successfully balance adaptation with continuity. Their achievement suggests that human societies can endure and flourish when they maintain connection with foundational values, while remaining open to beneficial innovations that enhance rather than replace essential characteristics. Tonight, as you journey through dreams, remember that you carry within yourself the same creative potential that enabled ancient Egyptians to transform desert landscapes into flourishing civilizations and bare rock faces into eternal monuments. Their legacy challenges us to build our own lives with the same combination of practical wisdom and spiritual aspiration that made their achievements possible. The eternal Nile continues its ancient journey toward the sea, carrying within its waters the dreams and accomplishments of countless generations who understood that true greatness comes not from conquering others, but from creating beauty, wisdom, and meaning that enriches human existence for all who follow. Their example illuminates pathways to war as relevant today as they were, when fulfillment that remained pharaohs ruled from golden thrones and pyramids rose like geometric prayers toward the eternal stars. The whispers of ancient winds carry us deeper into the twilight of pharaonic grandeur, where the mighty civilization that had dominated the ancient world for 3 millennia began its slow transformation into legend and memory. As you sink further sleep, envision the Gra into the embrace of peaceful that swept across Egypt during those final centuries of independent dual changes rule, when foreign armies marched through the Delta, while scribes in distant temples continued their patient work of preserving sacred knowledge that had accumulated across ages beyond counting. The Persian governors who administered Egypt from their palaces in Memphis discovered that ruling the ancient land required more than military force or administrative decree. The intricate systems that sustained Egyptian prosperity had evolved through countless generations of refinement, creating networks of irrigation, taxation, and religious observance that functioned according to principles older than any empire the Persians had previously conquered. These foreign rulers found themselves adopting Egyptian customs not from weakness, but from recognition aspects of Pharaoh, that certain Aeonic governance possessed wisdom that transcended cultural boundaries. Picture the Persian satrap participating in the annual Opet festival, his foreign features crowned with the traditional pharaonic regalia as he performed rituals that connected earthly authority with divine mandate. These ceremonies weren't mere political theatre, but essential functions that maintained the cosmic order upon which Egyptian prosperity depended. The foreign rulers who succeeded in Egypt were those who understood that they governed not just territory and population, but an entire worldview that required respectful integration rather than wholesale replacement. The Egyptian priests who served these foreign masters developed remarkable skills in cultural translation, explaining ancient traditions to rulers whose ancestral memories contained no knowledge of Nile floods or pyramid construction. These learned men became bridges between civilizations, preserving Egyptian wisdom while adapting it to serve new political realities. Their temple schools continued producing scribes who mastered both hieroglyphic writing and Aramaic administration, creating bilingual scholars who could function in multiple cultural contexts while maintaining connection to their pharaonic heritage. The economic relationships that bound Egypt to the broader Persian Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange as Egyptian grain fed distant armies, while exotic goods from Central Asia and India flowed through Alexandria's expanding harbors. These commercial networks carried more than mere commodities. They transmitted ideas, technologies, and artistic influences that gradually transformed Egyptian civilization, while introducing Egyptian concepts to peoples who had never gazed upon the pyramids or participated in Osiris mysteries. The Greek historians and philosophers who visited Egypt during this period recorded their amazement at encountering a civilization whose achievements stretched back through centuries that exceeded their own historical memory. Herodotus wandered through temple complexes whose construction had begun when his own ancestors were learning to work iron, while Egyptian priests explained religious concepts that had influenced human thought since before Homer composed his epics. These cultural encounters created mutual fascination that would profoundly influence both civilizations. The rebellion that temporarily restored native Egyptian rule during the 4th century demonstrated the enduring appeal of pharaonic traditions even after generations of foreign domination. The pharaohs of the 30th dynasty drew upon deep cultural memories to inspire resistance against Persian reconquest, while adapting their military and diplomatic strategies to contemporary geopolitical realities. Their success in maintaining independence for several decades proved that Egyptian civilization retained vitality and resilience despite centuries of foreign influence. The massive temple construction projects undertaken during this final flowering of native rule reflected both religious devotion and political necessity, as these last pharaohs sought to demonstrate divine approval while providing tangible evidence of restored Egyptian greatness. The craftsmen who carved these monuments preserved traditional artistic techniques while incorporating subtle influences from the broader Mediterranean world, creating hybrid styles that maintained Egyptian identity while acknowledging contemporary cultural developments. When Alexander the Great crossed into Egypt in 332 BC, he encountered a civilization that had already demonstrated remarkable adaptability in preserving essential characteristics while accommodating foreign rule. The young Macedonian conqueror's pilgrimage to the oracle of Ammon at Siwa revealed his understanding that legitimate authority in Egypt required divine sanction, according to traditions that antedated any Greek philosophical concept of kingship. His adoption of pharaonic titles and participation in Egyptian religious ceremonies established precedents that would influence his successors for 3 centuries. The Ptolemaic dynasty that emerged from Alexander's conquests created perhaps the most successful synthesis of Greek and Egyptian civilizational elements in the ancient world. These Macedonian pharaohs maintained Greek cultural identity while adopting Egyptian religious roles and administrative practices, creating a hybrid form of Hellenistic kingship that preserved Egyptian institutions within broader Mediterranean political networks. Their capital at Alexandria became a cosmopolitan center where Egyptian wisdom traditions encountered Greek philosophical inquiry and scientific methodology. Imagine walking through the great library of Alexandria at its zenith, where Egyptian priests collaborated with Greek scholars in translating ancient texts while developing new synthetic approaches to mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The intellectual ferment created by this cultural convergence produced innovations that influenced civilizations throughout the Mediterranean world, while preserving Egyptian knowledge within new linguistic and conceptual frameworks. These scholarly exchanges demonstrated that cultural synthesis could enhance rather than diminish the distinctive achievements of participating civilizations. The religious syncretism that characterized Ptolemaic Egypt created new forms of worship that appealed to diverse populations while maintaining essential spiritual functions. The cult of Serapis combined Egyptian divine attributes with Greek philosophical concepts, producing a deity that satisfied both Egyptian religious needs and Greek theological preferences. These synthetic religious movements influenced mystery religions throughout the Hellenistic world, while preserving Egyptian wisdom traditions within new ritual and doctrinal contexts. The economic prosperity that sustained Ptolemaic rule demonstrated Egyptian agricultural and commercial capabilities that had supported civilization along the Nile for millennia. Egyptian grain continued feeding much of the Greek world, while luxury goods from Africa and Asia passed through Alexandria's harbors, generating wealth that funded cultural achievements rivaling those of classical Athens or Hellenistic Pergamon. This commercial success proved that Egyptian civilization remained economically vital despite political transformation. The gradual weakening of Ptolemaic power during the later centuries reflected both internal succession disputes and external pressure from the expanding Roman Republic. Civil wars between rival claimants disrupted governmental efficiency, while Roman intervention reduced Egyptian independence and territorial control. Yet even during these troubled times, Egyptian cultural institutions continued functioning, preserving traditions that would outlast the political arrangements that temporarily governed them. Cleopatra VII embodied the complex cultural synthesis that had characterized Ptolemaic Egypt, while demonstrating remarkable political acumen in her attempts to preserve Egyptian independence through strategic alliances with powerful Roman leaders. Her mastery of multiple languages and her deep understanding of both Egyptian and Greek cultural traditions enabled her to function effectively in the cosmopolitan world of late Republican politics, while maintaining genuine commitment to Egyptian interests and identity. The famous relationships between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony represented sophisticated diplomatic strategies rather than mere personal romance. These alliances were designed to protect Egyptian independence through association with Roman power, the military leaders who possessed necessary to defend Egypt against other Roman competitors. The ultimate failure of these strategies resulted from the broader dynamics of Roman civil war, rather than any inadequacy in Cleopatra's political calculations. The Battle of Actium and its aftermath marked the end of independent Egyptian rule after more than 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization. Yet this political transformation didn't immediately eliminate Egyptian cultural identity or institutional traditions that had proven their resilience through centuries of foreign domination. The Romans, who inherited control of Egypt, discovered, like the Persians and Greeks before them, that governing this ancient land required accommodation with local customs and traditions. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic titles and participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, demonstrating the enduring symbolic power of pharaonic authority, even among rulers whose cultural backgrounds lay far from the Nile Valley. The integration of Egypt into the Roman Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural diffusion as Egyptian religious concepts, artistic styles, and scientific knowledge spread throughout Roman territories, while Roman legal principles and administrative practices influenced Egyptian society. The cult of Isis experienced remarkable expansion throughout the Roman world during the early imperial period, as this Egyptian goddess attracted devotees from Britain to Syria who found in her worship spiritual resources unavailable in traditional Roman religion. The mysteries associated with Osiris and Isis offered initiates personal salvation and eternal life through participation in divine death and resurrection, concepts that would profoundly influence later religious developments throughout the Mediterranean basin. Egyptian mathematical and astronomical knowledge, preserved in temple libraries and scholarly schools, contributed to Roman engineering projects and calendar reforms, while influencing the development of scientific methodology throughout the empire. The practical wisdom accumulated through millennia of Nile flood prediction and agricultural management proved valuable for Roman administrators governing diverse territories with varying environmental conditions. The rise of Christianity in Egypt created complex interactions between Egyptian religious traditions and new monotheistic beliefs that challenged fundamental assumptions about divine nature and cosmic order. Egyptian monasticism emerged as a distinctive Christian movement that drew upon pharaonic traditions of religious devotion while adapting them to serve new spiritual needs. The Desert Fathers, who established monastic communities in the Egyptian wilderness, preserved ancient wisdom traditions within Christian theological frameworks. The Coptic language that evolved from ancient Egyptian enabled the preservation of Egyptian cultural identity within Christian contexts, while facilitating communication between Egyptian Christians and their coreligionists throughout the Mediterranean world. Coptic literature included both translations of Greek Christian texts and original compositions that reflected distinctly Egyptian approaches to Christian theology and spirituality, demonstrating the continuing vitality of Egyptian intellectual traditions. The Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century brought another wave of cultural transformation as Islamic institutions gradually replaced Christian and Greco-Roman administrative systems. Yet even this dramatic change didn't completely eliminate Egyptian cultural distinctiveness, as Islamic Egypt developed characteristics that reflected the continuing influence of Pharaonic and Coptic traditions upon Arabian cultural imports. Egyptian scholars in medieval Islamic centers preserved and transmitted ancient knowledge while contributing to new synthetic intellectual movements. The gradual Arabization and Islamization of Egypt occurred through complex processes of cultural adaptation rather than wholesale replacement, as local traditions influenced the development of distinctly Egyptian forms of Islamic civilization. Coptic Christians continued practicing their faith while contributing to Islamic scholarly endeavors, creating cultural synthesis that preserved elements of ancient Egyptian wisdom within new religious and linguistic contexts. Medieval European travelers who visited Egypt marveled at the ancient monuments that still dominated the landscape, while recording local traditions that preserved fragmentary memories of pharaonic greatness. These accounts, often mixed with fantasy and misunderstanding, nevertheless transmitted awareness of Egyptian achievements to European audiences and helped maintain European fascination with ancient Egypt throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods. The Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517 integrated the ancient land into another vast empire while preserving local administrative traditions that had evolved through millennia of foreign rule. Egyptian scholars and administrators continued serving imperial governance while maintaining cultural practices that connected them to their pharaonic heritage. The remarkable continuity of Egyptian civilization through successive waves of foreign domination demonstrated the enduring vitality of cultural traditions that successfully balanced adaptation with preservation. The Mamluk period had witnessed remarkable architectural and artistic achievements that combined Islamic artistic principles with distinctly Egyptian aesthetic preferences, creating monuments that honored both religious devotion and pharaonic architectural traditions. The mosques, madrasas, and palaces built during this era demonstrated that Egyptian creativity continued flourishing under Islamic patronage, while maintaining connections to ancient artistic principles that had influenced Nile Valley civilizations for millennia. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 marked the beginning of modern European engagement with ancient Egyptian civilization through systematic scholarly investigation rather than mere treasure hunting or romantic speculation. The scholars who accompanied the French military forces conducted comprehensive studies of Egyptian monuments while creating detailed records that would influence European understanding of ancient achievements. Their work laid foundations for scientific Egyptology while stimulating renewed global fascination with pharaonic culture. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone during the French expedition provided the key that would eventually unlock the mysteries of hieroglyphic writing, enabling direct communication across the millennia with ancient Egyptian voices that had remained silent since the end of pharaonic civilization. Jean-François Champollion's successful decipherment in 1822 opened new windows into ancient Egyptian consciousness, while revealing literary achievements, religious insights, and historical records that confirmed the sophistication of pharaonic intellectual culture. The development of modern archaeology during the 19th and 20th centuries transformed understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization through systematic excavation and scientific analysis of material remains. Each tomb uncovered, each temple restored, each papyrus translated, added new dimensions to knowledge, while demonstrating the remarkable creativity and technical skill that had characterized Egyptian craftsmanship throughout its long development. Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's intact tomb in 1922 created international sensation while providing unprecedented insights into royal burial practices and artistic achievement. The treasures recovered from this single tomb revealed the extraordinary wealth and technical mastery that had characterized New Kingdom craftsmanship, while capturing global imagination through their beauty and historical significance. Contemporary archaeological investigations continue revealing new aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, while employing advanced scientific techniques that enable more precise understanding of construction methods, artistic techniques, and daily life practices. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and chemical analysis provide tools for investigation that surpass anything available to earlier generations of scholars, while confirming the sophistication of Egyptian achievements. The influence of ancient Egyptian civilization on contemporary culture extends far beyond academic study to encompass architectural principles, artistic inspiration, and philosophical concepts that continue shaping human development. Egyptian monuments inspired neoclassical architecture throughout Europe and America, while Egyptian artistic motifs influenced decorative arts and fashion design. The concept of monumental architecture as expression of cultural values derives ultimately from Egyptian precedents that demonstrated how built environments could embody spiritual and political ideals. Modern medical practices preserve Egyptian innovations in surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and diagnostic procedures that were first developed in temple medical schools along the Nile. The Edwin Smith Papyrus and other medical texts reveal sophisticated understanding of anatomy and disease processes that anticipated later medical developments, while demonstrating empirical approaches to healing that combine practical knowledge with spiritual insight. The Egyptian achievement in creating writing systems that could record complex information while serving artistic and religious functions influenced the development of literacy throughout the ancient world, while providing precedents for contemporary approaches to visual communication. Hieroglyphic principles of combining phonetic and ideographic elements appear in modern logo design and digital communication systems that seek to convey meaning through visual symbols. Egyptian religious concepts about individual moral responsibility and post-mortem judgment profoundly influenced the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while providing frameworks for understanding ethical behavior that continue shaping human consciousness. The emphasis on moral conduct as prerequisite for spiritual advancement anticipated later religious developments, while demonstrating sophisticated ethical thinking that recognized connections between personal behavior and cosmic order. The Egyptian understanding that civilization requires balance between individual fulfillment and collective welfare offers wisdom for contemporary societies navigating tensions between personal freedom and social responsibility. Their success in maintaining cultural continuity through millennia of political change suggests approaches to social development that preserve essential values while adapting to changing circumstances. Egyptian artistic achievements continue inspiring contemporary creative expression through their demonstration that technical mastery and spiritual vision can combine to produce works of enduring beauty and significance. The emotional power of Egyptian sculpture and painting derives from artists' ability to capture both individual character and universal human qualities within forms that suggest eternal meaning beyond temporal limitations. The Egyptian approach to preserving cultural memory through monumental architecture and written records provides models for contemporary societies seeking to maintain historical awareness while adapting to rapid technological and social change. Their understanding that civilizations require both innovation and preservation offers guidance for navigating challenges that threaten cultural continuity in rapidly changing environments. As you drift deeper into restful slumber, envision yourself standing before the Great Sphinx at dawn, when the first rays of sunlight illuminate its ancient features with golden radiance that has blessed this sacred guardian for over 4,000 years. The wisdom preserved in its enigmatic gaze speaks of human achievements that transcend the political arrangements and cultural circumstances that temporarily govern earthly affairs. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that cover temple walls throughout Egypt continue speaking across the centuries, with voices that remain remarkably contemporary in their exploration of fundamental human experiences. These ancient writers face the same questions about love, loss, purpose, and transcendence that confront every generation. Yet their responses demonstrate insights and wisdom that enrich contemporary understanding of human possibility and spiritual development. The preservation of Egyptian civilization through successive waves of foreign domination and cultural transformation demonstrates the resilience of traditions that successfully balance continuity with adaptation. Their achievement suggests that human societies can endure and flourish when they maintain connection with foundational values, while remaining receptive to beneficial innovations that enhance rather than replace essential characteristics. Tonight, as ancient pharaohs and queens visit your dreams, remember that you possess the same creative potential that enabled Egyptians to transform harsh desert landscapes into flourishing civilizations and bare cliff faces into eternal monuments celebrating human achievement. Their legacy challenges contemporary individuals to approach their own lives with the same combination of practical wisdom and spiritual aspiration that made Egyptian accomplishments possible. The eternal Nile continues its ancient journey toward the Mediterranean, carrying within its waters the accumulated dreams and achievements of countless generations, who understood that genuine greatness emerges not from dominating others, but from creating beauty, knowledge, and meaning that enriches human existence for all who follow. Their example illuminates pathways toward fulfillment and significance that remain as relevant today as they were when pharaohs ruled from golden thrones and pyramids rose like geometric prayers toward the infinite stars. The mystery and majesty of ancient Egypt lies not merely in its monuments and treasures, but in its demonstration that human beings can create civilizations of extraordinary sophistication, beauty, and endurance when they successfully synthesize individual ambition with collective purpose, earthly concerns with spiritual aspirations, and reverence for ancestral wisdom with openness to beneficial transformation. These lessons continue offering to build meaningful lives and guidance for contemporary efforts lasting institutions that honor both human dignity and cosmic order. Sleep now, and let the gentle whispers of the desert wind carry you through dreams populated by the magnificent ghosts of pharaonic glory, where golden sands preserve the footprints of gods and mortals who walk together along the banks of the eternal river, creating wonders that continue inspiring amazement and reverence across the vast expanse of time that separates their world from our own. In your dreams, the ancient land lives on, eternal and unchanging, where the wisdom of ages flows like the Nile itself towards seas of infinite possibility and eternal peace. The morning light that illuminated the Sphinx's ancient features had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties, each believing their rule would endure forever, yet all eventually succumbing to the inexorable flow of time that transforms even the mightiest kingdoms into memories preserved in stone and papyrus. As you continue your journey through the realm of dreams, picture the scholars of Alexandria during its golden age, their sandaled feet echoing through marble corridors, lined with scrolls containing the accumulated wisdom of centuries, where Egyptian priests debated with Greek philosophers about the nature of existence, while mathematicians calculated the movements of celestial bodies with precision that would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years. These learned men understood that knowledge possessed a sacred quality that transcended political boundaries and cultural differences, recognizing that wisdom belonged not to any single people, but to humanity itself. In the great library's reading rooms, Egyptian medical texts lay alongside Mesopotamian astronomical observations and Greek geometric treatises, creating an intellectual synthesis that pushed the boundaries of human understanding in directions that individual traditions might never have explored alone. The librarians who tended these precious collections were more than mere custodians. They were guardians of civilization itself, ensuring that the insights and discoveries of each generation would be preserved for those who would follow. Picture the systematic approach these scholars employed in their pursuit of knowledge, carefully copying deteriorating papyri while comparing different versions of the same text to establish authoritative editions that would serve students for centuries to come. Their workshops hummed with activity as scribes reproduced mathematical treatises, while translators worked to render Egyptian religious poetry into Greek verse that could convey both literal meaning and spiritual significance. The precision required for such work demanded not just linguistic skill, but deep understanding of the cultural context that gave meaning to ancient wisdom. The medical schools associated with Alexandria's temples continued the ancient Egyptian tradition of combining empirical observation with spiritual insight, training physicians who understood that healing required attention to both physical symptoms and the psychological factors that influence patient recovery. These healers studied anatomy through careful dissection, while also mastering the ritual procedures that addressed spiritual dimensions of illness, creating comprehensive approaches to medicine that recognized the complex relationships between body, mind, and soul. Egyptian agricultural knowledge, refined through millennia of Nile flood management, provided the foundation for expanded cultivation projects throughout the Ptolemaic territories. As engineers applied traditional irrigation techniques to new environments, while developing innovations that increased productivity and sustainability, the systematic observation of natural cycles that had enabled Egyptian farmers to predict optimal planting and harvesting times influenced agricultural practices throughout the Mediterranean world, demonstrating how practical wisdom accumulated in one region could benefit distant populations facing similar challenges. The artistic workshops of Ptolemaic Egypt produced masterpieces that combined traditional Egyptian techniques with Greek aesthetic principles, creating hybrid styles that appealed to cosmopolitan tastes while maintaining connections to pharaonic artistic traditions. Sculptors trained in both Egyptian and Greek methods developed new approaches to portraiture that captured individual personality within forms that suggested eternal significance, while painters experimented with perspective and shading techniques that enhanced the emotional impact of traditional Egyptian narrative compositions. The religious festivals that punctuated the Ptolemaic calendar maintained ancient traditions, while incorporating elements that appealed to the diverse populations living within Egyptian territories. These celebrations weren't merely entertainment, but essential rituals that reinforced social cohesion, while providing opportunities for cultural exchange between different ethnic and religious communities. The processions that wound through Alexandria's streets during major festivals created spectacular displays that proclaimed Egyptian religious authority, while accommodating the spiritual needs of Greek, Jewish, and other immigrant populations. Egyptian craftsmen during this period achieved remarkable technical mastery in metalworking, textile production, and jewelry making that rivaled any contemporary achievements, while drawing inspiration from artistic traditions spanning continents and cultures. The workshops that produced luxury goods for royal courts and wealthy merchants became centers of technological innovation, where traditional Egyptian techniques encountered foreign methods, creating synthetic approaches that enhanced both aesthetic appeal and practical functionality. The mathematical innovations developed by Alexandrian scholars built upon Egyptian computational traditions, while incorporating Greek geometric principles and Mesopotamian algebraic techniques, producing advances in mathematical theory that would influence scientific development throughout the ancient world. The practical applications of these mathematical discoveries extended far beyond academic exercises to encompass engineering projects, architectural design, and commercial calculations that supported the complex economic relationships sustaining Ptolemaic prosperity. Astronomical observations conducted from Alexandria's temple observatories combined Egyptian knowledge of stellar movements with Greek theoretical frameworks and Babylonian computational methods, producing comprehensive models of celestial mechanics that enabled accurate prediction of eclipses, planetary positions, and seasonal changes. These scientific achievements weren't merely intellectual accomplishments, but practical tools that supported navigation, agriculture, and religious observance throughout the Ptolemaic territories. The gradual transformation of Egyptian society under Ptolemaic rule reflected complex processes of cultural adaptation that preserved essential Egyptian characteristics, while incorporating beneficial innovations from the broader Hellenistic world. Greek became the language of administration and higher education, yet Egyptian continued serving religious and popular cultural functions, creating bilingual environments where educated individuals needed mastery of multiple linguistic traditions to function effectively in their professional roles. The legal systems that governed Ptolemaic Egypt demonstrated sophisticated synthesis of Egyptian, Greek, and other legal traditions that created comprehensive frameworks for managing the diverse populations and complex commercial relationships characterizing this cosmopolitan civilization. Egyptian concepts of royal authority and divine justice influenced the development of Hellenistic kingship theories, while Greek philosophical principles contributed to legal reasoning that enhanced the fairness and consistency of judicial proceedings. Egyptian religious concepts experienced remarkable expansion beyond their traditional geographical boundaries, as mystery religions based on Egyptian deities attracted devotees throughout the Hellenistic world, who found in Isis and Osiris worshipped spiritual resources unavailable in their ancestral religious traditions. These synthetic religious movements preserved essential Egyptian theological insights, while adapting them to serve the spiritual needs of diverse populations living in very different cultural and environmental contexts. The commercial networks that connected Ptolemaic Egypt to markets throughout the Mediterranean and beyond carried more than material goods. They transmitted ideas, artistic styles, and cultural practices that enriched all participating civilizations while demonstrating the benefits of peaceful exchange over military conquest. Egyptian merchants established communities in distant ports where they maintained their cultural identity while adapting to local conditions, creating hybrid societies that preserved Egyptian traditions within new social and political environments. The architectural achievements of Ptolemaic Egypt reflected both continuity with pharaonic building traditions and creative adaptation to contemporary needs and aesthetic preferences. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, combined Egyptian monumental construction techniques with Greek architectural principles and practical engineering innovations that created a structure both beautiful and functionally superior to any previous lighthouse design. The decline of Ptolemaic power during the later centuries of their rule reflected both internal succession disputes and external pressures from the expanding Roman Republic. Yet, even during these troubled times, Egyptian cultural institutions continued functioning with remarkable resilience. Temple schools maintained their educational programs, while craft workshops continued producing goods that met both local needs and export demand, demonstrating the deep roots that Egyptian civilization had developed through millennia of continuous development. When Roman legions finally established direct control over Egypt following the Battle of Actium, they encountered a civilization whose institutional sophistication and cultural richness demanded respectful accommodation rather than wholesale replacement. The Romans discovered, as previous foreign rulers had learned, that governing Egypt effectively required understanding and cooperation with local traditions that had proven their practical value through centuries of successful application. Roman emperors, who assumed pharaonic titles, weren't engaging in mere political theatre, but recognizing the continuing importance of Egyptian religious and cultural concepts for maintaining social stability and economic productivity. Their participation in traditional festivals and their support for temple construction projects demonstrated pragmatic recognition that Roman imperial interests were best served by preserving rather than destroying institutions that continued serving essential social functions. The integration of Egypt into the Roman Empire created unprecedented opportunities for cultural diffusion, as Egyptian knowledge and practices spread throughout Roman territories, while Roman administrative techniques and legal principles influenced Egyptian society. This mutual exchange enriched both civilizations while creating new synthetic forms of culture that combined elements from multiple traditions in creative and beneficial ways. Egyptian medical knowledge, accumulated through millennia of temple-based research and clinical practice, contributed significantly to Roman military medicine and urban health management, while influencing the development of medical education throughout the empire. The surgical techniques and pharmaceutical preparations preserved in Egyptian medical texts provided practical knowledge that saved countless lives, while demonstrating empirical approaches to healing that complemented theoretical medical frameworks developed in other traditions. The cult of Isis experienced remarkable popularity throughout the Roman Empire, as this Egyptian goddess attracted devotees who found in her worship emotional and spiritual resources that address personal needs, often neglected by traditional Roman religion. The mysteries associated with Isis offered initiates personal relationships with divine power that promised individual salvation and eternal life through participation in sacred rituals that transformed human consciousness through symbolic death and resurrection. Egyptian architectural principles influenced Roman public building projects, while Egyptian artistic motifs appeared in Roman domestic decoration, demonstrating the continuing appeal of Egyptian aesthetic traditions, even among populations whose cultural backgrounds lay far from the Nile Valley. The obelisks that Roman emperors transported to Rome and Constantinople served not just as exotic trophies, but as symbols of imperial authority that drew upon Egyptian concepts of monumental architecture as expression of divine power and political legitimacy. The rise of Christianity in Egypt create interactions, complex between Egyptian religious traditions and new monotheistic beliefs that produce distinctive forms of Christian theology and spiritual practice. Egyptian monasticism emerged as a revolutionary Christian movement that drew upon pharaonic traditions of religious devotion while developing new approaches to spiritual discipline that would influence Christian development throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. The Desert Fathers, who established monastic communities in the Egyptian wilderness, preserved ancient wisdom traditions within Christian theological frameworks, while developing innovative approaches to spiritual growth that emphasized individual transformation through disciplined practice and contemplative prayer. Their achievements demonstrated how traditional religious insights could be adapted to serve new spiritual needs, while maintaining essential continuity with ancestral wisdom. Coptic Christianity that developed in Egypt combined Christian doctrinal principles with distinctly Egyptian cultural expressions that preserved elements of pharaonic civilization within new religious contexts. The Coptic language that evolved from ancient Egyptian enabled the preservation of Egyptian cultural identity while facilitating communication with Christian communities throughout the Roman world, creating bilingual religious culture that maintained connections to both local traditions and universal Christian fellowship. The theological controversies that divided early Christianity found distinctive expression in Egyptian Christian communities, where ancient traditions of religious speculation and mystical experience influenced the development of Christian doctrine in directions that sometimes conflicted with imperial religious policies. The courage demonstrated by Egyptian Christians in defending their theological convictions, even when this brought persecution and martyrdom, reflected spiritual traditions that had sustained Egyptian civilization through millennia of foreign domination and cultural pressure. The Arab conquest of Egypt in the 7th century initiated another phase of cultural transformation as Islamic institutions gradually replaced Christian and Roman administrative systems, while accommodating local traditions that had proven their practical value through centuries of application. The process of Islamization occurred through complex negotiations between Islamic legal principles and Egyptian customary practices that created hybrid systems, preserving beneficial elements from both traditions. Egyptian scholars in medieval Islamic centers played crucial roles in preserving and transmitting ancient knowledge while contributing to new intellectual movements that synthesized Greek philosophical principles with Islamic theological insights and practical wisdom accumulated through Egyptian experience. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad included Egyptian mathematicians, astronomers, and physicians, whose work demonstrated the continuing vitality of Egyptian intellectual, cultural, and traditions within new linguistic contexts. The Coptic Christians who remained in Islamic Egypt continued practicing their faith while contributing to Islamic scholarly endeavors, creating remarkable examples of religious cooperation that transcended doctrinal differences through shared commitment to learning and cultural preservation. These communities maintained ancient traditions while adapting to new political circumstances, demonstrating the flexibility and resilience that had enabled Egyptian civilization to survive successive waves of foreign influence and cultural transformation. Medieval Islamic architecture in Egypt combined Arabian design principles with distinctly Egyptian aesthetic preferences, while incorporating practical building techniques that had evolved through millennia of Nile Valley construction experience. The mosques, madrasas, and palaces built during the Islamic period demonstrated continuing Egyptian creativity while honoring both Islamic religious requirements and pharaonic architectural traditions that emphasized monumental scale and symbolic significance. The Mamluk rulers, who governed Egypt during the later medieval period, created one of the most successful examples of military aristocracy in Islamic history, while patronizing cultural achievements that combined Islamic artistic principles with Egyptian aesthetic traditions. Their architectural projects transformed Cairo into one of the Islamic world's most beautiful cities, while their developments patroned scholarly age, supported intellectual, that preserved ancient Egyptian knowledge within contemporary Islamic frameworks. The Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517 integrated the ancient land into another vast empire, while preserving local administrative traditions that had evolved through millennia of imperial experience. Egyptian scholars and administrators continued serving imperial governance while maintaining cultural practices that connected them to their pharaonic heritage, demonstrating once again the remarkable adaptability that had enabled Egyptian civilization to flourish under successive foreign rulers. The French expedition to Egypt under Napoleon marked the beginning of modern European engagement with ancient Egyptian civilization through systematic scholarly investigation that laid foundations for scientific Egyptology. The scholars who accompanied the military forces conducted comprehensive studies of Egyptian monuments while creating detailed records that would influence European understanding of ancient achievements and stimulate renewed global fascination with pharaonic culture. The decipherment of hieroglyphic writing by Champollion opened new windows into ancient Egyptian consciousness, while revealing literary achievements and historical records that confirmed the sophistication of pharaonic intellectual culture. Each translated text added new dimensions to understanding, while demonstrating that ancient Egyptians had grappled with fundamental questions about existence, morality, and transcendence that remain relevant to contemporary human experience. Modern archaeological investigations continue revealing new aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization, while employing advanced scientific techniques that enable more precise understanding of construction methods, artistic techniques, and daily life practices. Each discovery adds to the ever-expanding picture of Egyptian achievement, while confirming the remarkable creativity and technical skill that characterize this civilization throughout its long development. As you float deeper into the peaceful realm of dreams, imagine yourself walking through the corridors of eternity, where ancient Egyptian voices still whisper their timeless wisdom about the sacred relationships between earthly existence and cosmic order. Their insights about balance, harmony, and the pursuit of meaningful existence continue offering guidance for anyone seeking to create lives of beauty, purpose, and lasting significance in our contemporary world. The twilight years of pharaonic civilization witnessed transformations that would have seemed inconceivable to the pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom, as ancient traditions adapted to serve new masters while preserving essential wisdom that had sustained Egyptian culture through countless centuries of change. Picture the Coptic monasteries that dotted the desert landscape during the early Christian centuries. Their mud brick walls rising from the same sands that had witnessed the construction of the Great Pyramids, yet sheltering communities devoted to spiritual practices that drew inspiration from both pharaonic wisdom and Christian revelation. These monastic pioneers understood that the harsh beauty of the Egyptian desert provided ideal conditions for contemplative practices that purified the soul while connecting individual consciousness to cosmic truths that transcended cultural boundaries. The Desert Fathers who established these communities weren't fleeing from civilization, but rather seeking its deepest foundations, recognizing that genuine spiritual insight required withdrawal from worldly distractions that prevented clear perception of divine reality. Their cells carved into limestone cliffs echoed with prayers that combined Christian theology with meditation techniques inherited from temple traditions stretching back to the earliest dynasties. The manuscripts preserved in these desert libraries represented one of humanity's most remarkable achievements in cultural continuity, as Coptic scribes carefully copied texts that bridged the gap between pharaonic wisdom and Christian spirituality. These patient scholars understood that knowledge possessed sacred qualities that demanded careful preservation, creating illuminated volumes that combined artistic beauty with textual accuracy in ways that honored both intellectual content and aesthetic expression. Their scriptoriums became workshops where ancient Egyptian artistic techniques merged with Christian iconographic traditions to create hybrid visual languages that spoke to souls shaped by multiple cultural influences. Imagine the daily rhythms that governed these monastic communities, where the call to prayer echoed across desert valleys, at hours determined by astronomical observations that drew upon pharaonic knowledge of celestial movements. The monks who gathered for worship understood that their liturgical cycles participated in cosmic harmonies that had been recognized and celebrated along the Nile for thousands of years, even as their prayers addressed the Christian God through forms that would have been familiar to ancient temple priests. The agricultural techniques employed by these desert communities demonstrated remarkable continuity with pharaonic farming methods, as monks applied traditional irrigation principles to create oases of fertility that supported both physical survival and spiritual contemplation. Their gardens produced not only food for daily sustenance, but also medicinal plants whose healing properties had been recognized and employed by Egyptian physicians since the earliest medical papyri. The knowledge required for such cultivation passed from generation to generation through oral traditions that preserved practical wisdom within spiritual contexts that gave deeper meaning to seemingly mundane activities. The Islamic conquest that gradually transformed Egyptian society during the 7th and 8th centuries created new opportunities for cultural synthesis as Arabic language and Islamic legal principles encountered local traditions that had proven their practical value through centuries of successful application. The process of cultural adaptation that followed wasn't simple replacement, but rather creative negotiation between different worldviews that preserved beneficial elements from each tradition while developing innovative approaches to common human challenges. Picture the scholars who gathered in Cairo's early Islamic academies, where Egyptian mathematicians worked alongside Arabian theologians and Persian philosophers to create intellectual syntheses that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge in multiple directions simultaneously. These learned men understood that wisdom possessed universal qualities that transcended the particular cultural forms through which it was expressed, recognizing that truth could be discovered and preserved through careful study of diverse traditions, rather than exclusive devotion to any single approach. The architectural marvels that rose throughout Islamic Egypt demonstrated remarkable fusion of Arabian design principles with distinctly Egyptian aesthetic preferences and practical building techniques that had evolved through millennia of Nile Valley construction experience. The mosques that dominated Cairo's skyline combined Islamic religious requirements with pharaonic concepts of monumental architecture as expression of divine authority and cultural achievement. These structures weren't merely functional buildings, but comprehensive artistic statements that proclaimed the continuing vitality of Egyptian creativity within new religious and political contexts. The craftsmen who decorated these Islamic monuments preserved traditional Egyptian techniques for working with stone, metal, and precious materials while adapting their skills to serve new artistic purposes that honored both Islamic theological principles and local aesthetic preferences. Their workshops became centers of technical innovation, where ancient methods encountered new influences from across the Islamic world, creating hybrid approaches that enhanced both practical functionality and artistic appeal. The commercial networks that connected Islamic Egypt to markets throughout the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean carried more than material goods, transmitting ideas, artistic styles, and cultural practices that enriched all participating civilizations, while demonstrating the benefits of peaceful exchange over military conquest. Egyptian merchants who established communities in distant ports maintained their cultural identity while adapting to local conditions, creating hybrid societies that preserved Egyptian traditions within new social and political environments. The medical schools that flourished in medieval Cairo combined Islamic theoretical frameworks with practical knowledge inherited from Pharaonic and Coptic medical traditions, producing comprehensive approaches to healing that recognize both physical and spiritual dimensions of illness. These institutions trained physicians who understood that effective treatment required attention to environmental factors, dietary practices, and psychological conditions that influenced patient recovery, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of holistic health principles that anticipated later medical developments. The mathematical innovations developed by Egyptian scholars during the Islamic period built upon ancient computational traditions while incorporating algebraic techniques and geometric principles from diverse sources, producing advances in mathematical theory that influenced scientific development throughout the medieval world. The practical applications of these mathematical discoveries extended far beyond academic exercises to encompass engineering projects, architectural design, and commercial calculations that supported the complex economic relationships sustaining medieval Islamic prosperity. Sleep peacefully now, carried by the eternal currents of the Nile that continue flowing toward distant seas, bearing with them the accumulated dreams and wisdom of countless souls who understood that true immortality lies not in monuments of stone, but in the enduring power of human creativity and spiritual aspiration. In your dreams, the Golden Age lives forever, where pharaohs still rule from thrones of light, and the pyramids cast their shadows across infinite sands of time.